Chapter 950. Renbocchen returned to Earth, walked to the window, and looked at the city below. After a long time, he let out a long sigh. He wasn't very nervous when he was speaking. However, after returning, the state of being fully immersed in the story subsided, and he felt waves of fatigue. Facing more than a dozen top experts who could easily kill him with their fingers and using words to shake their minds, Renbocchen really didn't want to experience such an experience again. Although he had countless stories from Earth in his mind, it wasn't easy to put them together without exposing any logical problems. He had to remember almost every word that was said and not give himself away in his subsequent words. Fortunately, it seemed like he had succeeded. What Renbocchen was most afraid of was that someone would get close to him at that moment. Although he was dozens of meters away from those honorable experts, this wasn't a problem for them. Not to mention, there was Wen Shaoxing beside him. If that really happened and they found out that he came from this world without any martial arts, he would really be done for. Fortunately, this situation didn't happen. At this point, the rest of the matter was almost logical. This incident was a daunting experience without any mishaps, and the rewards were great. With this group of people, it would be easier to integrate all the experts of the human race. The only problem was killing Deputy Protector General Wu Kai, the two commandants, and those patrolmen. The Empress wouldn't let this matter go so easily. Although the overall situation was important, revenge was more important to the Empress. She had always been a very tough and clear-cut person. Renbocchen always felt that the name Renwishing was more suitable for her. After standing in front of the window for a while, Renbocchen took a shower and prepared some things. At the same time, he took the opportunity to understand the recent situation on Earth. Recently, the relationship between China and the United States had been a little tense. In fact, there used to be some friction between the two countries. Since China took over the position of the #1 economic power a few years ago, this kind of friction not only didn't decrease, but also appeared in various fields. It wasn't until the appearance of the unknown martial arts that the attitude of the Western countries, media, and people changed. Many of the allies of the United States hesitated for a while before letting go of their reservations and taking the initiative to come over. Not only that, but the number of ordinary people applying for immigration had also gradually increased. However, there had been some changes recently. The city exoskeleton system had reached the point where it could be used on the battlefield, and it had begun to be equipped with small-scale troops. To put it simply, this simple alloy shell was faster, stronger, and more accurate. Coupled with the artificial intelligence system and the basic techniques obtained from China, the individual strength of the U.S. military had increased significantly. This was the source of their confidence. Even some of America's allies began to change their stance. For these guys, technology, which was something that could be seen and touched and could be controlled, was obviously easier to understand and have confidence in than something that was hard to estimate. The news that Renbocchen received later confirmed this point. It was said that some of the Earth-will experts from the military had been transferred to that chaotic continent. It seemed like both sides were going to wrestle there. On one hand, Renbocchen asked someone to monitor the situation there. On the other hand, he prepared his own things and even got someone to bring over a blonde Westerner. 2.5 days later, he returned to that world without stopping. Renbocchen was wearing pajamas, sitting on a chair, and holding a plate of fragrant beef noodles in his hand. One of his feet was on a box next to him, and the other was stepping on a person. The light in front of him darkened, and he was transported from the floating villa on Earth to the underground hole. The sudden change in light made Renbocchen almost unable to see anything clearly. However, he wasn't surprised at all. He maintained the same posture with a calm expression until he gradually saw his surroundings clearly. Then, he smiled and said, "Everyone, we meet again." In fact, everyone was more surprised than him. In fact, as time passed, everyone's hearts were always restless. After all, the other party had disappeared in front of everyone's eyes. This meant that the situation had completely changed from them holding the initiative to the other party. Although the other party said that he would come back, no one knew exactly when he would come back. It wasn't until the air changed and Renbachian's silhouette appeared that everyone calmed down. However, after they calmed down and saw the state that Renbachian was in, they had mixed feelings. This was because Renbachian's state at this time was really too relaxed. It was as if he had just woken up at home and was eating breakfast. Meanwhile, they were waiting anxiously here. Renbachian naturally made such a posture on purpose. Sometimes, a posture could let others feel his attitude and also let them understand his position. Because the technology of quantum transmission isn't mature enough, I need some time to prepare. However, I came back a little earlier than I expected. Renbachian smiled. Although Renbachian said that the technology wasn't mature enough, it was enough to shock and astonish everyone. This was transferring a person out of thin air and back with other things. Looking at the box beside Renbachian and the human-like object he was stepping on, everyone's eyes almost popped out of their sockets, and their hearts burned with passion. Renbachian also felt a little scared. It was because he had forgotten that the space on the statue's shoulders was limited. Although it was enough for one person and was even spacious, there was still a box and a person at his feet. It was a blessing that he didn't fall. Renbachian felt that his luck was really good during this period of time. I've only eaten half of it. Do you mind? Renbachian held the plate and gestured to everyone. He then lowered his head and continued to finish the plate of beef noodles before putting the plate on the statue's head. This is the Walloran people. We didn't kill them all, but absorbed the survivors into our ranks after our victory. Now, we've brought them here to broaden your horizons. Renbachian picked up the unconscious person at his feet and threw it to Wen Shaoxing. Wen Shaoxing took it and sized it up. It looked similar to a human, but its facial features and hair color were very strange. It wasn't an exaggeration to describe it as a demon. Wen Shaoxing clicked his tongue. This was the first time he had seen such a person. As for strength, it wasn't even comparable to an ordinary person, so there was nothing to be concerned about. Wen Shaoxing casually threw it to the others. A human body that weighed nearly 100 kilograms flew across a distance of dozens of meters in the air, and everyone looked like they were doing it with ease. Seeing such a strange person, everyone no longer doubted Renbachian's words. I told you before that two people can communicate directly from thousands of kilometers away. Renbachian opened the box, took out a radio station, turned on the power, and adjusted the frequency. There was no other sound apart from the sound of the electric current. Renbachian wondered if he had adjusted the frequency wrong or exceeded the range. How could Dayo's official chat group be so quiet? Especially since he was missing, shouldn't it be in full swing at this time? Ahem, is anyone there? Renbachian asked tentatively. At the same time, he paid attention to the others from the corner of his eye to see if they would stop him. The good news was that everyone was attentively watching Renbachian talk to that strange thing and pricked up their ears. Renbachian adjusted the volume to the maximum and heard a surprised and incredulous voice from the radio station, Xiao. Xiao Prince Consort. Although the voice wasn't too loud, everyone had sharp ears and was in a closed space. They immediately heard the voice coming from the strange box, and their eyes lit up. It's me. Renbachian laughed. Quick, inform Her Majesty that there's news about Xiao Prince Consort. There was a panic on the other end of the radio station. Xiao Prince Consort, where are you? Weren't you captured? Ahem, I'm just here to chat with people about life and ideals. Renbachian coughed dryly. Xiao Prince Consort, you are finally all right. This was Shui Yu from the Protectorate of the Southeast. Ahem, you almost scared me to death. This was Li Chincho. Kid, where are you? This was Hong Wu. You don't know, but Her Majesty is going crazy. After causing such a big mess, you won't be able to escape a beating when you return. This was Tong Jinye stirring up trouble. The entire chat group seemed to have come to life as if someone had sent a red packet. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second, Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 951. It had been 2 days since Renbaqian had been captured. One day after Renbaqian was taken away, the Empress received the news. Tong Jinye said that Renbaqian wouldn't be able to escape a beating when he returned. He wasn't trying to scare Renbaqian. If Renbaqian dared to tell the Empress that he was just going to talk about life and ideals, Tong Jinye still remembered Her Majesty's reaction at that time. The Empress, who was originally indifferent, suddenly froze as if she was frozen in place. This was the first time he had seen her react like this since she ascended the throne. She then asked in a daze, "What? Your Majesty, Xiao Prince Consort, has been captured." "When? Who did it?" "Yesterday morning." "We still don't know who did it." The Empress came back to her senses and immediately became gloomy. It was as if a storm was coming, and the pressure from her body made everyone in the hall breathless. "Where?" The Empress's question was out of the blue, but the person who came to report still knew what she wanted to ask. "Heiyun District, Misty Rain Pavilion." "What about Exanjia? What about Lin Chaola? What about Li Yuanzhu?" The Empress emphasized every word she said. "Are they dead?" "They are fine." As soon as the incident happened, General Exanjia rushed back to Pingdu to pass on the news. "Why aren't they dead?" The Empress's voice was full of anger. Why couldn't so many people protect a single person? These people were all fine, but Renbaqian had been captured. After the Empress finished her sentence, she disappeared from the hall. She didn't even say that the court was dismissed and just left. After the Empress left, the hall boiled over like a pot of boiling water. Renbaqian's capture was the most serious matter for both the Empress and Dayo. The changes in Dayo had begun to show. Especially after witnessing the nuclear bomb, the people in court now attached more importance to Renbaqian. Whether it was the steam train or the diesel internal combustion engine that was being developed, they placed great importance on them. However, at this time, Renbaqian, who was the mastermind behind all this, had been captured. Immediately, many people wanted to go to the Yun nation to kill him. But before they could finish arguing, an aura had already arrived in front of the main hall from the rear palace. "Your Majesty." Everyone turned to look at the front of the hall and saw the Empress sitting on Qi Shui's back with a longbow in her hand. A quiver of bone arrows hung beside Qi Shui. This was all that the Empress had. The Empress took a deep breath, suppressed her anger, and said to Shi Qing, "Inform Zi Donglai to tell everyone in the Yun nation that they have 2 choices, find Xiao Prince Consort or die." All the people of the Yun nation. The Empress repeated. This time, it wasn't just the practitioners of the Yun nation, but the nearly 100 million people of the Yun nation. This showed how angry the Empress was. If something really happened to him, she dared to bury all the people of the Yun nation with him. Even if it left behind a world of blood and countless blood feuds, it didn't matter. Everyone in the imperial court was flabbergasted. Even they were shocked by the Empress's order. It was not tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or millions of people. It was tens or even tens of millions of people. That was 5 times the population of the Aboriginals. To kill all of them. Everyone felt a little pressured. Based on the current military strength of Dayo, they could transfer troops from the Protectorate of the North and Protectorate of the South to the Yun nation, which could reach a maximum of 80,000 soldiers. If they had to kill everyone, with 80,000 soldiers, how many does one person have to kill? Someone asked softly, 100, right? Nonsense, it's obviously 10 by 10. What's the difference between 10 by 10 and 100? Someone from the Ministry of Revenue couldn't help but ask. It's much more than that. One person has to kill at least 1,000. Oh. I see. That's right. Everyone in the hall had already started to think about how many people one person had to kill. After the Empress finished speaking, she ignored everyone's reaction, rode Qi Shui out of the palace alone, and headed for the Yun nation. A group of ministers followed behind her, and they followed Qi Shui to persuade the Empress. At least bring a few more people and have someone to take care of her. However, after a few dozen kilometers, they were still left far behind by Qi Shui. After a discussion, more than half of them returned to Lan City, and the other half went straight to the Yun nation. One day and night, a full 20 hours. The Empress ran for nearly 1,000 kilometers within these 20 hours, and Qi Shui's body began to bubble. There was a large amount of water stored in Qi Shui's body and on the surface of its skin. However, as it ran for a long time, every cell on its body was breathing and trying its best to absorb energy from the outside world. This resulted in a result. The water and air fused on the surface of Qi Shui's body and changed. Due to the high-speed wind, they finally turned into bubbles. Along the way, bubbles danced all over the sky, and the Empress followed behind Qi Shui like a bubble flag. The Empress went straight to Pingdu, and the first thing she asked upon arrival was, "Zhao Prince Consort, is there any news?" The second thing she said was, "Give it water, a lot of it." The third thing she said was, "Where are they?" The Empress was furious, but she wasn't given a chance to vent. Xanjia and the others were still looking for clues outside. "Has my message been passed down?" The Empress asked Zidonglai with a cold face. "I have already informed all the sects in the Yun nation and posted it in all the cities." Zidonglai's face was still cold. This was mainly because he had injured his facial nerves in the past, so his face was expressionless. He didn't discount the Empress's orders at all. Although it hadn't been posted all over the Yun nation, it had been posted in most of the cities. Overnight, it could be said that the entire Yun nation was shaken. For the sake of one person, nearly 100 million people of the Yun nation were going to be buried. It could be said that the Yun nation, which had just settled down, was once again in turmoil. This news immediately aroused the anger of all the people of the Yun nation. People scolded the Empress for being arrogant and cruel. All of a sudden, the youths of the Yun nation were so angry that they almost revolted. They could still retreat previously, but with this news, if it really reached that point, no one could retreat anymore. Before this, many people of the Yun nation didn't know who Zhao Prince Consort was. Only when the Empress's husband was mentioned would people suddenly realize who he was. However, after this, there was no one who didn't know the name Zhao Prince Consort. Of course, it wasn't anything positive. However, the Empress didn't care about this, and neither did Zidonglai. The only person who cared about this matter still didn't know. The Empress rested for a few hours in Pingdu. Although she wanted to go directly to the place where Rinpoche had disappeared, she could endure it. However, Qi Shui couldn't and needed to rest for at least a few hours to recover a little. Just as she was about to set off again, she received news from Rinpoche. When she heard that he was fine, the Empress felt exhaustion wash over her. It wasn't physical exhaustion, but mental exhaustion. From yesterday morning until now, she had been tense all the time. She quickly walked to the room with the radio station and heard Rinpoche's voice talking to everyone through the radio station. Hearing this voice, the Empress felt that her tense nerves could finally relax. She took a few steps forward, took the radio station's walkie-talkie, and asked in a deep voice, "Where are you?" "I should be in Great Xiao." Rinpoche's voice immediately weakened when he heard the Empress's deep and cold voice. "Are you in danger now?" "Specific location." "I'm going to look for you." The Empress really didn't want to wait for Rinpoche to come back on his own. What she urgently wanted now was to rush over and capture him. Then, she would hang him from the beam of the palace and give him a good beating. She would then ground him and forbid him from leaving a radius of 50 kilometers from Lan City. As for the person who had captured Rinpoche, that wasn't the most important thing at the moment. The most important thing was to find out where Rinpoche was and whether he was in danger. She would only be at ease if she went there herself. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second, Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 952. Even though it was only 1 day, which was a very short period of time, it was truly a torment for the Empress. Fortunately, she was relieved after receiving Rinpoche's message. However, Rinpoche didn't tell her his current location. After all, there were more than a dozen people looking at him. He used the radio station to communicate because they wanted to see a tool that could allow them to communicate from thousands of kilometers away. When the voices of Hongwu, Tongzhenye, and the others came out of the radio station, everyone in the hall gasped in unison. There was also the sound of people slapping their thighs. It was indeed like this. It was indeed true. To be able to communicate from thousands of kilometers away, the value of such a treasure was too great. If it were owned by an ordinary person, it would definitely be kept a secret and wouldn't be used until the most critical moment. However, for the other party, this was a commonplace tool that didn't need to be concerned about. This could be seen from their attitude. Rinpoche simply said a few words, turned off the radio station, and looked up at the crowd again. Everyone, it's time to change things. I believe that you will choose your future well. Were they going to be reared as cattle or sheep, or were they going to use this opportunity to fight for their lives? Since things had already reached this point, Rinpoche wasn't worried about their choice. In fact, they had indeed made a choice, and this was their only chance. If they had a choice, who would be willing to be livestock for the rest of their lives? Moreover, these were top experts who stood at the top of the human race. Everyone was silent and waiting for someone to speak. I saw that you brought someone with you just now. I want to go to your country to take a look, an old woman's voice was heard. Everyone's eyes were filled with astonishment, but they quickly lowered their gazes. Although this request was abrupt, it seemed reasonable after thinking about it. Who wouldn't want to see such a world with their own eyes? Rinpoche looked at her with a faint smile and said, I refuse. Why? The old woman's face darkened. You aren't qualified. Rinpoche said faintly, not caring about what the person in front of him thought. I'm just giving you a chance. You aren't qualified to ask for anything. Even if you have chosen your path, it's all for your own sake. What does that have to do with me? Everyone was speechless as they thought about Rinpoche's words. Although they didn't feel good, he was right. They were only doing it for themselves. The old woman looked sullen. It had been a long time since anyone had spoken to her like this. Besides, what could they do even if he rejected them? The other party had already proven that his words were true. Perhaps Rinpoche could threaten Zhongshan with his life and the Empress's life. However, the other people in the Temple of Heaven wouldn't agree to it. The first person to oppose Rinpoche would be Deputy Temple Master Zhongshan. Now was not the time to shed all pretense of cordiality. After taking a few deep breaths, the old woman regained her composure. Then can you let us leave this land of exile? This was also everyone's hope. Since Rinpoche could come, it meant that he could leave as well. Everyone suspected that he had a passage to enter and exit the banished lands. Some people's hearts were in their throats as they stared intently at his expression. As long as they could leave the banished land, they would be able to fly freely. Since they were able to achieve what they had today among billions of humans, no one would worry about leaving this place. However, there were also people who sneered. This kind of thinking was weak in itself. No. I came here by accident. I can leave through quantum transmission, and I can even take a few people with me. However, are you going to abandon all humans and run away? I have no intention of helping you. There is only one choice for you, and that is to fight. For yourselves and for all humans, fight against the heavens, the earth, the sea, and the foreign races until you leave this place. This is where your value lies, and this is where the humans here can show their value. Everyone was silent for a while before someone said, "What do you want to do? What do you want us to do?" This attitude confirmed Rinpoche's position. After all, he came from a more powerful human race. He could change all of this and leave at any time. Rinpoche smirked. Like I said, fight, war, defeat the heavens, the earth, the sea, and the enemy until you step on all the corpses in the world or are stepped on by others. Of course, I will bring you technology, just like what I'm doing now. The development of technology requires time and resources. The experts of the human race also have the potential to compete with the experts of the enemy. However, before that, I have a request. Rinpoche's gaze slid across everyone's faces that were hidden in the shadows. Cut off your own rotten flesh. The purpose of the establishment of the Temple of Heaven is good. However, over the past thousands of years, the Temple of Heaven has become a malignant tumor within the human race. I hope to see your side that is valuable to the human race. In fact, what he wanted to say was to disband the Temple of Heaven. This land didn't need an uncontrolled organization with so many experts lurking in the dark. However, he also understood that this proposal was almost impossible to achieve. On the contrary, it would make everyone hostile to him, which wouldn't do him any good. Therefore, he simply buried this idea in his heart and thought of ways to rope them in later. This world would change faster and faster, and these old and rotten people would eventually be unable to keep up with the times and be abandoned by this era. After listening to Rinpoche's words, everyone had their own thoughts. Most of them were unconvinced, but no one spoke up because it didn't affect their interests. Who's Su Wuming? Rinpoche asked. I am. Are you asking me because of the Yun Nation? I can tell you that I was the one who did it. What do you want me to do? A thin old man with 100 strands of hair opened his eyes. His eyes seemed to contain a sword, and his gaze became like a sword that pierced people's skin. Rinpoche had some impression of this person because he didn't have any surprised reactions like the others. He just sat there quietly, but it was impossible to ignore him. Besides you, there are others, right? Rinpoche asked faintly. Su Wuming was silent. Although it wasn't difficult for him to kill Wu Kai, it wasn't his turn to kill ordinary warriors. The traces of weapons left at the scene also explained everything. I arranged it. Wen Shaoxing said calmly. In fact, Rinpoche knew even if he didn't say it. Luohua sect was also your doing, right? Rinpoche asked again. It was arranged by the corpse dog hall, Wen Shaoxing replied. Rinpoche could feel everyone's eyes on him. After pondering for a while, he realized that this matter wasn't easy to handle. After all, Su Wuming wasn't an ordinary person. Regardless of his strength, he was also a member of the Temple of Heaven. Besides, this matter definitely wasn't decided by Su Wuming alone. If Rinpoche wanted to force him to death, how could the others sit back and watch? Needless to say, the fox mourned the death of the rabbit. Besides, there were still Wen Shaoxing and the others. As for the matter of Luohua sect, he didn't care much. If that was the only thing, he would just smile and let it go. However, he couldn't let Wu Kai go. Even if the two sides were enemies before, according to the novels, shouldn't the enmity be resolved with a smile and no longer be pursued? Shouldn't the overall situation be more important? If he said this to the Empress, would she listen? Not to mention the Empress, even the other people in the court wouldn't agree. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth was the habit of the Aboriginals. Renbochin had been on the side of the Aboriginals since he came to this world, so he naturally had to stand on their side. Renbochin pondered but couldn't figure it out. In fact, he had considered this problem on Earth. However, this problem was still unsolvable. Renbochin lowered his eyelids slightly and finally made a decision. A life for a life, a debt for a life. As soon as he said this, it was as if a volcano had erupted in the main hall, and a tyrannical aura pierced the sky. Not far away, everyone in the fishing village stopped in their tracks and looked in the direction of the sea god temple with bewilderment. Baidu Search 881 Chinese Network. No advertising words. Chapter 953. A life for a life, and a debt for a life. This voice was heard in the hall, and everyone was in an uproar. One by one, the doddering elders opened their eyes with a cold glint in them. A tyrannical aura swept through the hall, and cracks appeared on the statue in the temple of the sea god above. This was no longer a matter of Su Wuming, but of the entire temple of heaven. Su Wuming was the venerable of the temple of heaven, and everything he did represented the temple of heaven. Renbochin's other requests could still be discussed, but the people of the temple of heaven couldn't agree to this one. Many of them were even angrier. Even if he was from another human nation, how dare he make such a request? Renbochin lowered his eyes slightly and let those auras surround him. In fact, everyone had a sense of propriety and didn't directly attack Renbochin with their auras. Otherwise, more than a dozen top spirit world experts could seriously injure Renbochin with their auras alone. Renbochin sighed in his heart. After going around in circles, everything had returned to the beginning, and the effect of his previous words had been wasted. How could he not know that the other party couldn't agree to this request? However, he still had to show such an attitude. This was because he was Xiao Prince Consort of Dayo. He couldn't tell the Empress and the court to give up their hatred for the sake of the overall situation, right? He couldn't do it. Whether emotionally or in other aspects, Dayo was his home in this world. As for reason, Renbochin felt that he was still in the right now, but unfortunately, the other party probably wouldn't reason with him. Forget it, let it go back to the original position. Fortunately, there were still two gains. One was that he knew who the mastermind was, and the other was that he had at least saved his life. This was the most important thing. As for the Temple of Heaven itself, it was dispensable in Renbochin's heart. Although they were indeed powerful and needed such tyrannical experts, they would definitely be able to go further after leaving Tianjing Basin, especially Su Wuming. However, as mentioned before, such a powerful and uncontrollable force was of little value to Renbochin. It could even be said that the disadvantages outweighed the advantages. The stronger they were, the more troublesome it would be in the future. With this in mind, Renbochin's desire to subdue these people faded. If possible, it would be a good choice to blow them up with a nuclear bomb. Without this force, there would be less trouble. Unfortunately, the 8 sub-hall masters and vice-hall masters were still outside. If they were blown up, the remaining forces would retaliate crazily. Moreover, his teleportation cooldown was not up yet. Renbochin opened his eyes, looked at everyone, and said faintly, "Think about it yourselves. Of course, you can also hide here and wait for the day when the human race becomes glorious." This was another opportunity for them to lay low from now on. With the skills of these people and the influence they had in the dark, it would be very difficult for the Empress to find them. After he finished speaking, he carried the unconscious foreigner, jumped down from the statue's shoulder, and walked out without looking back. He believed that these people would not do anything to him. Then, his vision went black. "Temple Master, we can't touch this person." Zhongshang sat on the statue with a faint smile in his eyes. "Even if it is for the sake of the human race. We can't let him leave for now." The old lady landed on the statue that Renbochin was originally sitting on. She stretched out her hand and opened the box that was slightly bigger than a person. Other than the radio station, there was also a metal box. She didn't know what was inside. Temple Master, what are we going to do with him? Zhongshang asked again. Although this person is from the outside world and is of great importance, he is too arrogant and doesn't respect the Temple of Heaven at all. Let's keep him for a few days and discuss how to deal with him. We'll only keep him for a few days. After he wakes up, he must have a way to leave, Zhongshang said. Although the old lady didn't say anything, she was quite happy. Originally, this person was a little troublesome, but now, he was courting death. Whoever dared to agree to his conditions would be a traitor of the Temple of Heaven. In recent years, the pressure from Zhongshang to force her to abdicate had been increasing. Now, she could recruit Su Wuming and the others, who were originally neutral, which was also a good thing. With a shake of her feet, the radio station and the metal box flew out. When she opened the metal box, she saw a cylinder that was half the height of a person. It wasn't light, and its surface was completely made of metal. She didn't know what it was used for. The old lady returned to the statue with the cylinder and the radio station and repeated, "It's impossible to agree to his request. A life for a life." What a joke. This person came from the outside world, but he wasn't without weaknesses. Qi Zixiao was his weakness. Lock him up for a few days and don't let him wake up. Inform the sub-temple masters to come back for a discussion. Chief, I'm very interested in this person. How about keeping him with me? You won't be worried with me guarding him, right? Zhongshang suddenly said. The old lady's eyes flickered. She originally wanted to keep Rinpoche by her side to see why the soul worm didn't work. She sensed that the soul worm was fine at the moment. However, since Zhongshang had spoken, she couldn't refute. Moreover, if something really happened to this person, she would have an excuse. The old lady nodded. This person is very important. Deputy, don't let anything happen to him. Of course. Zhongshang laughed. That's all for today. Without saying a word, everyone got up one after another and disappeared from the hall. They also had to consider what to do in the future. Many people were also sighing in their hearts. Rinpoche's words originally tempted them, but unfortunately, the other party made a request that they couldn't agree to. The future situation was a little unpredictable. They really needed some time to weigh their options. Su Wuming took a deep look at Rinpoche and left without saying a word. It wasn't until Zhongshang left with Rinpoche and the strange man that the old lady snorted and sat there with her eyes closed. After a full hour, the stone statue under the old woman suddenly moved. The stone statue moved several meters to the side, revealing a pitch-black passage. The old lady walked into the passage, and the stone statue returned to its original position again. After walking down hundreds of steps along the passage, a small room appeared in front of them. In addition to the 2 oil lamps on the wall, there was a chair and a table. The most eye-catching thing was the 5 crystal coffins on the other side. There was an old man lying in each coffin. His whole body was soaked in a blue liquid, and even his nose and mouth were immersed in the liquid. However, if one took a closer look at these old men, they actually looked somewhat similar to the chief of the Temple of Heaven. The old lady stood in front of the coffin closest to the door for a moment, took a bell from the wall, and shook it. The crisp sound of the bell seemed to have some kind of mysterious penetrating power as if it came from the distant horizon. The old man in the crystal coffin at the end suddenly opened his eyes. Golden light burst out from his eyes, intertwined with the blue liquid, and dyed the liquid green. If Rinpoche saw this scene, he would definitely praise it. It was green and bright. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second, Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 954. The update had to be delayed. Originally, He had slept during the day and felt quite energetic after waking up. He had just changed the time, slept at night, and still felt like sleeping during the day. Just now, he had slept from 12 noon to 5 p.m. He reckoned that he had failed to adjust the time again. He felt stifled. Of course, these were all small problems. The most important thing was to garner support for his biological daughter. Throw all the tickets at her. The role of the year in The Female Empress's Gigolo was garnering support for his biological daughter. Currently typing, please wait a moment. After the content has been updated, please refresh the page to receive the latest update. Chapter 955. The elders in the 5 coffins were all old women. Their hair was all white, and their skin was full of wrinkles and spots. The old woman at the end opened her eyes and stiffly stretched out her hands to push open the crystal coffin above her. She sat up and greedily breathed in the world's air. The liquid slid down the surface of her body and finally gathered in the coffin to form a calm water surface. There was not a single drop of liquid left on the old woman's body, and the surface of her skin was only slightly damp. The old woman greedily breathed in the world's air. Her eyes scanned the room and finally focused on the temple master. The muscles on her face twitched a few times, and she stretched out her stiff hands to rub her cheeks and throat. Finally, she spoke in a voice that sounded like 2 pieces of wood rubbing against each other. "Qing Dian, how long has it been?" 83 years and 107 days, the temple master replied. 83 years. The old woman in the coffin repeated softly. She turned her head stiffly and glanced at the other coffins. She asked, "Haven't you found a suitable container yet?" "Not yet. It's too rare to find a container that can meet the requirements for the 6th conversion," the temple master said. "It's getting rarer. When Enchanting was around, 1 or 2 of them could be found occasionally. However, when I was around, I didn't encounter one in hundreds of years," the old woman in the coffin said. "This will be the last time I wake up. If I still don't have a container the next time I wake up, I will turn into ashes and die. I will never have the chance to change my container again." She then looked up at the temple master and said, "You are my only descendant and the last one here. This is the 2nd time you will be changing your container. There are still 1,000 years left. If there's a chance, you should go back. After so many years, everything in the Temple of Heaven has been set in stone. Even without you, the Temple of Heaven will continue to follow its previous path. As for us, Qing Ju and Qing Zi no longer have the chance to change their containers. Qing Ting still has 100 years left, and no matter how much I delay it, I will only have 300 years left after I wake up. If there's no hope, then destroy everything here." From the old woman's tone, it could be seen that she was not too keen on finding another container and changing her container again. Now, delaying her life was just an instinct that had long been seen through. Even if she fell into eternal darkness after this deep sleep, it would not cause too much of a stir in her heart. Even if this awakening reduced her existence by another 200 years, she didn't care at all. After that, he asked, "What happened to wake me up this time?" The temple master said, "If there were no changes, it would indeed be as you said. Even without me, the Temple of Heaven would continue on its original path. But now, something has changed." The temple master of the Heaven Tao Temple frowned. The old woman in the coffin raised her head and looked at her. "It seems very serious, otherwise you wouldn't have woken me up. In addition to this place, there is also a group of humans." The chief of the Temple of Heaven told him about Rinpoche in detail. The old woman's expression didn't change, but the golden light in her eyes became more and more intense. After a while, the golden light in the old woman's eyes gradually dimmed. "It's not necessarily a bad thing. Whatever they want to do, let them do it. You just need to continue doing what you're doing. Don't be impatient. The importance of the Temple of Heaven has already begun to decline, but it seems that it is still very useful. Then he said meaningfully, what's theirs is ours. As long as you bring everything they have to the God of Gold Zune, not only will everything they have become useless, but you might also be able to learn something from it. After all, our path has reached its limit, and we haven't been able to find a way to go further for many years. This is an opportunity. What I'm worried about is the other group of humans. According to that person, they are very powerful. From what he said about the Zerg and Protoss, although they aren't as powerful as the God of Gold Armor and the other deities, they aren't easy to deal with, and their numbers are even more terrifying, the Temple Master of the Heaven Dao Temple said. That's why we have to bring things back and turn what's theirs into ours. As long as we understand them, we can find their weaknesses. Besides, most importantly, have you noticed that their individual strength is very weak, and they don't have the power to resist our race? As long as we can find their location, everything they have will also be ours, the old woman said faintly. I understand, the Temple Master of the Heaven Dao Temple said. This may be the last time we meet in this world. I will return to the spiritual temple and wait for you. After the old woman finished speaking, she greedily took a few more breaths before slowly lying back in the coffin. The Temple Master of the Heaven Dao Temple silently closed the lid of the crystal coffin, turned around, and walked out. The Empress looked at Xanzhi, Lin Chaola, Li Yuanzhu, Lin Yu, and the others in front of her with a calm expression. Although it was calm, it was like a storm brewing on the surface of a calm sea. Remove Xanzhi from her position as the commander of the guards and send her to the mines for 3 years. The Empress said coldly. Remove Lin Chaola from her position as the librarian of Qingxin Palace Hall and send her to the mines for a year. Xanzhi's job was as a guard. After such a big incident, she was only sent to the mines for 3 years because nothing had happened to Rinpoche. If Rinpoche hadn't contacted her through the radio, the Empress would have thought of pulling Xanzhi down and beheading her. Xanzhi silently bowed to the Empress, took off her helmet, put it on the ground, and began to take off her armor. Zi Donglai looked down and stood to one side. Xanzhi took off her armor. In addition to safety pants, there was also a sports vest that was given to her by Rinpoche. Give her a set of coarse clothes and immediately send her to the mines, the Empress said in a deep voice. She turned to look at Lin Chaola, only to see her head lowered and not saying a word. However, her nose was bubbling. The Empress was a little angry even though she knew that this situation was normal for Lin Chaola. Lin Chaola, add one more crime and send her to the mines for 3 years as well. Lin Chaola was speechless. Drag her away. Is it over? What did Her Majesty say? Lin Chaola raised her head and asked softly as she was dragged out by the arms. I didn't think it through. Li Yuanzhu said faintly after seeing Qi Zixiao's gaze. Although she wasn't from Dao and Qi Zixiao didn't have the right to punish her, she still felt guilty and took the initiative to speak. Go back to Great Xia. I don't want to see you. Sorry. Li Yuanzhu cupped her hands at the Empress. She knew that the Empress was furious at the moment and would wait for Rinpoche to return. She pulled Lin Yu out of the courtyard. Lin Yu was deep in thought. After they were out of the city, Lin Yu asked doubtfully, in that case, can I only go to the mines to play with Lin Chaola in the future? Which mine? Li Yuanzhu turned to look and felt helpless. She didn't know what to do with this girl. Back then, she took a long time to say that Rinpoche was upstairs. When everyone returned, he was already gone. She felt like killing her. If she had said it at that time, none of these things would have happened. Let's go back to Great Xia. Oh. Half a day later, Lin Yu suddenly thought of something and said, we have run out of melon seeds. Let's go back to Lan City to buy some. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second, booksellers mobile. Chapter 956. After Li Yuanzhu and the rest left, the Empress sat on a chair and stroked the bulge in her abdomen. Zi Donglai stood quietly at the side without saying a word. Have they all retreated? The Empress's gaze was still on the ground as she asked faintly. They've retreated. However, the news has spread, and the people from the Yun nation don't seem too happy, Zi Donglai said casually. In fact, they weren't just unhappy. Their discontent was like a volcano eruption. His country had just been destroyed, and he had just convinced himself to start a new life under a steel knife. Suddenly, he had to bury nearly 100 million people in the Yun nation with him. Although the message was cancelled after only one day, who knew if it was really cancelled? Would it happen again after a while? What did the Aboriginals treat the people of the Yun nation as? Pigs and dogs. Under such circumstances, one could imagine how the people of the Yun nation would react. However, Zi Donglai simply said, I'm not too happy. The Empress pondered for a moment and said, appease them. It wasn't that the Empress didn't know the significance of the Yun nation. Then, he said, if there are any who make a big fuss, kill one to warn the others. I will order the rearguard commandery to assist you later. Yes. The value of the rearguard commandery in the Yun nation wasn't small. The rearguard commandery could do a lot of things that the military couldn't, especially when it came to the situation among the people and the underworld. At this point, the significance of Renbachian's establishment of the rearguard commandery could already be seen. Go down. The Empress waved her hand. After Zi Donglai left, the Empress stroked her lower abdomen. Her thoughts turned to Renbachian as she wondered where he was now. That small body of his could be smacked to death with a single slap. In the future, I will definitely not let him go too far away. I kind of want to drink calcium milk. Could that guy's hair be saved? Forget it, it doesn't matter. After thinking about it, the Empress smiled. A moment later, he furrowed his brows. Where was that fellow? Where was Great Xiao located? At this moment, he was on a planet in his sea of knowledge. He did not expect the other party to suddenly attack him. He did not expect that after he fainted, he would appear in his sea of consciousness after an unknown amount of time. Unfortunately, he could not wake up his body. The other party must have used some sort of method. What was he planning to do? No matter what the other party planned to do, there was no need to pay attention to it. He had given them a chance, but since they had other ideas, he would send them to reunite. In the box he brought back, other than the radio, there was a 400,000-ton nuclear warhead, and it could be detonated with a delay. Originally, the negotiations were going well, and he thought that the situation was settled. The nuclear bomb was just a precaution, but he didn't expect that it would actually be used. It was a pity that he had wasted so much time and effort. Renbachian felt a little regretful. In the end, he still had to take this step. There were many experts in the Temple of Heaven, and if one were to select carefully, there would still be people who could be of use. Unfortunately, he didn't have the time or opportunity to do so. Compared to them, his strength was still too weak. Just like this time, he had no ability to resist at all. It was better to send them on their way. After a while, he began to study the city below again. This new city was the core of Dayo and would be the center of the entire human race in the future, so it had to be as perfect as possible. In the endless darkness of the starry sky, a silkworm-like insect was flying into the distance. Not knowing how far ahead it was, there was a colorful area. It seemed to be even bigger than the previous balls. That human's knowledge bead was probably hidden there. However, this human's sea of knowledge was too big. That area didn't seem far, but after flying for so long, it still couldn't get closer. Naturally, Rinpoche didn't know that there was an insect flying around in his sea of knowledge, let alone what the so-called pearl of knowledge was. Back then, he had invested everything he had into the singularity. In the end, it had evolved into such a huge universe. After staying in his sea of knowledge for an unknown period of time, Rinpoche felt a suction coming from a certain point in his sea of knowledge. He knew that he could finally wake up. After a moment of dizziness, Rinpoche finally felt the existence of his body. He had to admit that it was convenient to use the divine sense in his sea of knowledge, and he could even shout, "I said, let there be light." However, without a physical body, it always made him feel empty. When he opened his eyes, he found himself on a couch. The surrounding environment was an antique and rather exquisite room that was mainly made of brown solid wood. A faint fragrance lingered in front of his nose, making him want to take a deep breath and swallow it into his stomach. In addition to himself, there was an old man sitting on a chair in the room, holding a cup of tea and slowly sipping it. The old man looked gentle with a faint smile in his eyes. He wore a green robe and sat very straight. "Mr. Ren, I was rude before." Rinpoche sat up from the bed and felt his body, but there was no discomfort. After feeling his body, Rinpoche looked up and asked, "Who are you?" It was too dark in the hall earlier, and he couldn't see the faces of everyone clearly. It was difficult for him to recognize the person in front of him. "I'm Zhongshang, one of the deputy temple masters of the Temple of Heaven." Rinpoche nodded. It turned out that this person was Zhongshang. Temple Master Zong. How much time has passed? 4 days. That was enough time. Rinpoche turned his gaze to the furnishings in the room and looked at them with some regret. "Mr. Ren, don't you have anything to ask?" Zhongshang asked with a smile. "What do I need to ask?" Rinpoche asked faintly. "I've given you a chance to choose." Zhongshang's eyes darkened. "Mr. Ren, we can't hand over Su Wuming. He represents the Temple of Heaven. I've also given you a chance to disappear from now on," Rinpoche said bluntly. "However, it seems that you think I'm joking with you." "It was the Temple Master's decision to keep you," Zhongshang said. "For me, it might not be a bad thing to disappear from now on. The Temple of Heaven has carried too many burdens for too long." Rinpoche sneered, turned his head, and continued to look at the furnishings. In fact, there have always been 2 voices in the Temple of Heaven. One of them represents the current actions of the Temple of Heaven, while the other expresses disgust with some of the actions. "You mean that the Temple Master is the former and you are the latter?" Rinpoche asked with his back facing Zhongshang. "That's right. However, we are too few in number and aren't strong enough to change the situation of the Temple of Heaven." Zhongshang nodded with a smile. "Therefore, I came to see you in the hope of cooperating with you." "What qualifications do you have to cooperate with me?" Rinpoche was finally a little interested, but his words lacked interest and weren't polite at all. For so many years, the Temple of Heaven has been in the dark, watching the changes in the world, and grasping a lot of things. "I think there should be a place where you can use it." Rinpoche's heart skipped a beat. The other party's attitude was quite humble this time. "Tell me about it." The smile on Zhongshang's face slowly faded, and he said seriously, "Kill the Temple Master. He's not human. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second, Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 957. The person who killed the chief of the temple isn't human. Hearing these words echoing in the room, Rinpoche's heart skipped a beat. He turned to look at Zhongshang and saw that his face was serious and his eyes were filled with killing intent. Zhongshang's face, which originally looked gentle and kind, was now a little fierce. "How did you know?" Rinpoche asked in a deep voice. He had wondered if there would be foreign races in the temple, but it was just a thought. He didn't expect that there would be people in the temple who knew about it. The seriousness on Zhongshan's face eased slightly. He got up and walked to Renbachian's side. He moved a shelf and it slid silently to the side, revealing a tunnel. "Please follow me." Zhongshan got up and walked down. He took a flint from the wall next to him, lit a torch, and the tunnel was immediately illuminated. The two of them walked all the way down and finally came to a secret room. "Your defenses aren't very tight," Renbachian said lightly. How could the chief of the temple and the foreign races be placed in such a simple secret room? If someone else had come in by mistake, Zhongshan would have turned into ashes by now. It looks simple, but in fact, it requires special finger strength to knock dozens of times in an instant. Other than me, no one can come in unless this residence is razed to the ground. However, at that time, our branch will probably be extinct. It won't be a big deal even if we are discovered, Zhongshan explained as he led the way. Renbachian finally understood. "Your branch?" Renbachian asked again. When the temple was founded, there were a total of 42 ancestors, and a total of 31 branches were passed down. Over time, these 31 branches became 19 branches. There are exactly 8 chief, 2 deputy chief, and 1 chief. Renbachian did some calculations and found that this number was just right. Where there are people, there will be disputes. Zhongshan sighed. Renbachian immediately knew where this number came from. However, about half of them died without knowing why. Zhongshan said again. As he spoke, he lit a few oil lamps hanging on the wall in the secret room, and everything in the room was suddenly revealed. There was nothing in the space, not even the simplest stool. Instead, the walls were full of paintings. Upon closer inspection, they were all women. What was surprising was that one of the portraits on the wall was of a young woman, another of an old woman, then another young woman, then another old woman, and so on. Zhongshan pointed to 2 of the pictures and said, "This is the first temple master Yujing. This is after she grew old. This is the second palace master of the Yujing Palace, as well as after he grew old." Renbachian stood in front of the wall and looked at them one by one. Suddenly, he gasped in surprise. "That's Hall Master Faidu. He should be the 3rd Hall Master's faction. This is Vice Palace Lord Yujing, the 4th one. This is the Deputy Palace Master of the Palace of Heaven, the 5th. Zhongshan introduced the paintings one by one. If one only looked at the pictures of them when they were young, one wouldn't be able to see much. They had different appearances, different temperaments, and different beauty and ugliness. However, if one looked at the portraits of their old age, one would see that all of their faces were somewhat similar. No matter what their faces were like when they were young, whether they were peerlessly beautiful or ugly, when they grew old, they actually looked quite similar. They were even exactly the same. For example, the 1st Temple Master Yujing, the 4th Deputy Palace Master Yujing, the 7th Temple Master of the Palace of Heaven, and the 14th Temple Master of the Kain Temple. For example, the 2nd Temple Master Yujing, the 11th Temple Master Yujing, and the 14th Temple Master of the Palace of Heaven. They were almost carved from the same mold. However, when they were young, these people had almond-shaped eyes, slanted eyes, oval faces, and round faces. However, when they grew old, they actually looked like they were carved from the same mold. In addition, the appearance of each temple master was also quite similar, especially their eyes, which seemed to have a kind of, due to their martial arts, their lifespan is longer than that of ordinary warriors. Therefore, very few people can discover the changes in their appearance. Renbachian was a little puzzled. "Why did you draw every temple master?" "Because every one of them was a woman." Upon hearing this answer, Renbachian felt that Zhongshan's faction was actually quite pitiful. Because the first 2 temple masters Yujing were quite popular, some people naturally kept their portraits at that time. However, some problems were discovered after that. They were too similar in their old age, Zhongshang continued. Renbochin felt that there should be more than 2 temple masters. Just 2 temple masters didn't mean anything. Zhongshang definitely wasn't telling the truth. However, this had nothing to do with him. He wasn't interested in the dark history of Zhongshang's faction. He wasn't interested at all. What was wrong with men being a little wretched and perverted? At first, we thought that it was because of their martial arts, but that wasn't the case. They were always secretly looking for a replacement, which wasn't surprising. We were the same. However, their approach seemed to be somewhat different. In a short period of time, the strength of those who took over would increase greatly, and the original temple master would die. Those who took over would be promoted in a very short period of time and be very familiar with many things, which was why we were aware of the problem. In fact, 1,000 years after coming to this land, the human race had a renaissance. At that time, many outstanding people were born. There were 11 people in the world who had reached the level of opening up heaven and earth and thousands of spirit will experts. At that time, some people proposed to return to their homeland, and even many people in the Temple of Heaven thought so. This was because the reproduction ability of the foreign races was far inferior to ours, and their recovery ability wasn't as good as ours. At that time, large areas of land were empty. As long as they found a place to stay and persisted for more than 10 years, it was possible for them to regain their foothold and return to their homeland. However, this idea was later interrupted, and they killed those outstanding people who wanted to leave. They were also the ones who caused all of this. From then on, our faction began to pay attention to them and finally discovered the truth. In fact, it wasn't just us. There were others who also discovered it, but they later died for various reasons. Only we have survived until now, Zhongshang briefly recounted. Why didn't you say it out loud? Wasn't the entire Temple of Heaven a match for her alone? Ren Baqian asked. She wasn't alone, Zhongshang replied. Back then, someone revealed this news in a meeting attended by half of the people. As a result, 5 factions completely sided with her and survived. In addition, the temple masters of 11 factions died, and 4 of the factions that didn't have a successor were completely destroyed. Ren Baqian sneered after hearing this. There were actually people who sided with the foreign races. Zhongshang also looked a little ashamed when he talked about this matter. No one knows what happened at that time. However, one thing is certain. Her faction was stronger than it looked on the surface, and it might even be stronger than all of us combined. This was why 11 temple masters died and 5 temple masters had no choice but to side with her. After that, my faction didn't dare to act rashly because we should be the only ones who knew the truth. Zhongshang sighed. If we were also severed, then the Temple of Heaven would really become a lackey of the foreign races. I originally thought that I wouldn't have a chance in this generation, but I didn't expect to meet another human faction. I felt that the opportunity one had been waiting for had finally arrived. From the story you told, you should have very powerful weapons that are enough to fight against her, Zhongshang said. Su Wuming surpassed the spirit will level, right? He wasn't her match either. Ren Baqian suddenly asked. There are still 1 or 2 people in every generation who can reach the heaven and earth domain. Back then, there were also experts who weren't weaker than Su Wuming, Zhongshang said. Ren Baqian raised his eyebrows. He originally wanted to blow this place up, but the emergence of Zhongshang made it a little difficult to deal with. Ren Baqian did have a powerful weapon, but it also had a large area of effect. When that time came, it would be impossible for others to leave except for him. Otherwise, the other party would also notice that something was wrong. As for whether Zhongshang's words were true or false, Ren Baqian didn't have much doubt. This was because the old woman's reaction at that time had already made him feel strange. If the other party was from the foreign races, then it would make sense. Baidu search 081 Chinese network yen. No advertising words. Chapter 958. As Rinpoche looked at the portraits hanging on the wall, he pondered over his own thoughts. The best way to kill the other party was to detonate the nuclear bomb directly. He didn't know where the nuclear bomb was after he fainted. The hall was underground, and if the nuclear bomb was brought elsewhere, the other party might not necessarily die. What about my box and the things inside? Rinpoche turned his head and asked. It's with the chief. I was afraid that she would do something to you, so I brought you out and didn't care about the box. The specific location. It should still be in the Temple of Heaven, which is the hall from that day. She rarely leaves there, Zhongshan said. Rinpoche felt relieved when he heard this. The other party was dead for sure. With his own nuclear bomb by his side, he would definitely die. The only problem was that there were probably only a few people left in the Temple of Heaven. Rinpoche looked up and said frankly, I can kill her. However, I'm afraid that there won't be any survivors within a radius of dozens of kilometers. This includes the Temple of Heaven and this village. Rinpoche made a circle with his hand. Bang! That's all. Rinpoche raised his hands and made an explosion. And all of you will be buried with her. Zhongshan's expression changed drastically. As long as she is dead, I can expose her identity and control the situation in the Temple of Heaven. Even if there are people standing with her, they won't be a match for the others. In that case, you have to bring the things in the box and send something else in at the same time. I can tell you that the box contains a weapon that I can use now. The result of using it is what I said just now. Rinpoche patted Zhongshan on the shoulder and said, You saved your lives. If Zhongshan hadn't made such a request to him and told him about the past, he would have been ready to detonate the bomb directly. He would go directly to Earth and run in a few days while wearing a radiation suit. Speaking of which, he kind of missed the Empress. If she saw him, she would be very happy. Although Zhongshan didn't know what Rinpoche meant by saving their lives, he knew that Rinpoche naturally had a plan. He knew that Rinpoche had made up his mind when he woke up and didn't ask anything, so he didn't doubt Rinpoche's words. He was even a little glad that Rinpoche's methods were completely different from them. I can try. Her control over the Temple of Heaven has weakened over the years, and I have been trying to touch her bottom line. If I ask her for that kind of thing, I think she won't find it strange. Zhongshan said, Tomorrow is the day when the temple masters will come to discuss. In any case, whoever goes in will be buried with her. Rinpoche spread his hands. Zhongshan thought for a moment. Understood. Where is it? What time is it now? When Rinpoche woke up, the sky outside was bright, but he didn't know the time. 3/4 to the hour. Rinpoche calculated in his mind. It was 1:45 in the afternoon. There was still time. Then, he said calmly, Now it's time to talk about something else. As I said before, you saved all of your lives. So, what can you do for me? Zhongshan wasn't surprised, nor did he care. Since his identity had been confirmed, everything he did was for the sake of the human race. We can hand over the entire Great Xia to you. Zhongshan smiled at him. Do you have such great power? Rinpoche's heart skipped a beat. The Temple of Heaven could actually decide the ownership of this region of Great Xia. Zhongshan said 2 words. Su Qing. He's actually one of your people. Rinpoche was indeed a little surprised. Yes, but he doesn't know it himself. Zhongshan laughed. For thousands of years, the Temple of Heaven has always been hidden behind the scenes. On the surface, they naturally have other identities to cover up. Among them, the Temple of Heaven also has another identity, the Zhanyang sect. Although not many people know about it, some large sects with a long history still know about it. Then, Zhongshan added, the Temple of Heaven will destroy the dissidents of the evil wind at night. This is the case with the Temple of Heaven. Now that Great Xia is in a hopeless situation, if this continues, it will only be a waste of the human race's blood. After hundreds of years, it will still reach this step. It is better to change the dynasty and change the weather when there is no cure. When Great Xia was founded, Renbaqian seemed to understand. The same identity as Su Qing. Zhongshan nodded. Zhongshan was still confident about this condition. Since he had to trust this person in front of him, it would be better to hand over the entire human race to him, which would have a greater chance of success. Dayo and the Yun nation were still too small. However, after Renbaqian understood, he just casually said, forget it, you can keep Great Xia for yourselves. Zhongshan was stunned as he didn't expect Renbaqian to push such a great benefit away. One had to know that in the past thousands of years, many people had shed blood for the sake of becoming the ruler of Great Xia. Now that it was placed in front of Renbaqian, he didn't want it. Zhongshan carefully observed Renbaqian's side profile, wanting to see if he was sincere or not. However, Renbaqian really didn't want it. Dayo and the Yun nation had already exhausted him, and he didn't even have time to cultivate with the Empress. If Great Xia was added to the mix, he wouldn't be able to live anymore. Managing and changing a country was something that only those who had done it would know. Holding the killing sword sounded good, but unless it was a fatuous ruler, who would be happy? Moreover, he had other ideas about Great Xia. As long as Dayo developed well enough and was attractive enough, Great Xia would naturally become Dayo's talent base. Looking at the United States in the past and China today, it had already pointed out the path for him. Zhongshan couldn't help but ask, what do you think, Mr. Ren? I want the Temple of Heaven. Renbaqian turned his head and looked straight at him. If he didn't take down the Temple of Heaven at this time, it would be intolerable. Zhongshan couldn't help but laugh. This is what I should do. With Mr. Ren's status, the Temple of Heaven will follow your lead for the sake of the human race. However, if the ruler of Great Xia changes, Su Qing will have nothing to do with the thief temple. This has been the case for thousands of years. Renbaqian didn't expect Zhongshan to be so straightforward. Seeing that Zhongshan was so understanding, he didn't have anything else to say. As for Great Xia, he really didn't want it. Since Zhongshan was willing to be a weapon, it didn't matter if he kept the Temple of Heaven. Besides, it might be of great use in the future. As for Zhongshan going back on his words in the future, Renbaqian wasn't worried about this. How about this? I'm hungry. I'll go eat and take a bath, then bring the things back, Renbaqian said. Please. I'll wait here. Zhongshan took 3 steps back after saying this, distancing himself from Renbaqian. This approach made Renbaqian feel very comfortable. As the air distorted, Renbaqian disappeared into thin air. Zhongshan circled around the place where Renbaqian disappeared 3 times, but still couldn't figure out how he did it. He then heaved a sigh of relief. After thousands of years and generations, he had finally waited for this day to be set right. He didn't have to worry about the Temple of Heaven becoming a weapon in the hands of the foreign races. Moreover, there was finally hope for the human race. He didn't know if he would have the opportunity to see his homeland, the scattered Star Sea, the Valoran continent, and the vast world. After being distracted for a while, Zhongshan quickly came back to his senses. The most important thing now was to think about what to say when he went to the main hall. In addition, Su Wuming was talented and responsible. Although he was cold and devoted to the sword, he was extremely fair. He didn't know if Zhongshan would let him go. Even if he hid in the world and watched the world change. Baidu searched the novel website of Yunlai Pavilion to let you experience the latest and fastest novel chapters. all the novels were updated in seconds. Chapter 959. When Rinpoche came back again, he was wearing baggy pants, a t-shirt, and sunglasses. Zhongshan couldn't help but take a few more glances at this strange outfit. In addition, there were 2 more boxes in his hands. He casually opened the box in his right hand. Inside was a metal box similar to the one in the previous box. However, this time, it was not 400,000 tons, but 10,000 tons. The yield was not small, but it was detonated underground, so the gas produced by the explosion could not spread quickly. A large number of particles, photons, and rays, as well as the accompanying sound waves after tearing through the air would also be reduced. It would affect the village, but there should not be too many casualties. Did the various hall masters return today? You can leave those who don't deserve to die outside, Rinpoche said. Zhongshan smiled bitterly at first. There were more than 40 people, and at least half of them didn't deserve to die. If these people were left outside, the people inside would be suspicious. After thinking about it for a while, he realized that it did not matter if they were suspicious. Even if 1 or 2 people came out, it would be fine as long as the temple master did not come out to check. Once the temple master of heaven was dead, the rest would be easy to deal with. All right. Zhongshan nodded seriously. Then it settled. Send me a signal. When the time comes, you'd better hide quickly. Rinpoche clapped his hands, looking relaxed. Pressing the detonation button was indeed an easy task. Mr. Ren has to go with me. Otherwise, they will be suspicious. After all, the sub-temple masters have returned this time for Mr. Ren. Zhongshan smiled. Rinpoche's expression froze for a moment. If he were to go, he would at least have to reach the entrance of the shrine. This distance was already somewhat dangerous for him. After all, this was a direct confrontation with a nuclear bomb, and the power of this nuclear bomb was only a simple assessment. If anything went wrong, how far can you run in 3 breaths? Rinpoche suddenly asked. 300 zhang. 1,000 meters was enough. All right. When the time comes, you can run with me, Rinpoche said. Just like that, the 2 of them settled the matter. Then, Zhongshan said hesitantly, Su Wuming used to work for the Temple of Heaven. Would Mr. Ren let him off? There was also Wen Shaoxing and the others. They can leave the Temple of Heaven and never appear again. Rinpoche looked at him. Fine, I'll give them this chance. In the future, no one should ever hear of their name, no one should ever see them. If I hear any more news about them, don't blame me for being ruthless. Thank you, Mr. Ren. Zhongshan cupped his hands and bowed. Subsequently, the 2 of them returned to the room. The sky was still dark, and Zhongshan bade farewell. Mr. Ren, please rest first. I'll go look for the palace master in the morning. Everyone will gather in the evening to discuss the matter. After Zhongshan left, Rinpoche took out the radio station from another box, adjusted it to the corresponding frequency, and contacted the Empress in a short while. When are you coming back? Or I can bring you back. Even though the Empress's voice was cold, her concern could be heard. Rinpoche laughed upon hearing this. At least 2 to 3 days, at most 4 to 5 days. Everything is going well here. I think we'll be back soon. The Empress silently noted in her heart that she would beat Rinpoche up for another 6 to 4 hours after he came back in 2 to 3 days. If he came back in 4 to 5 days, she would beat him up for another 8 to 10 hours. If she exceeded this time limit, the additional time would double. A day later, he would be beaten up for 4 more hours. Is it convenient to talk now? Sort of. Where are you? A region near the sea in Great Xia. I'm not sure of its exact location. They killed Wu Kai. Renbao was silent for a while before replying, yes. The Empress didn't ask what Renbao had promised them. She would talk about this when he came back. Anything she said now would only cause unnecessary changes to Renbao. Although the Empress didn't intend to forgive the murderer, she didn't want to cause any trouble for Renbao at this time and even put him in danger. I have stationed troops at the border and can go north at any time. You, be more careful. Don't worry, Your Majesty. Renbao smiled brightly. He then chatted with the Empress for a while before turning off the radio station. The next morning, Zhongshang went to the Temple of Heaven and returned at noon with a metal box in his hand. Renbao opened it and saw that there was indeed a nuclear warhead inside. In this way, everything was ready except for the final push. She's a little suspicious, Zhongshang said. Will it affect her? Renbao turned to look at him. I don't think so. She won't leave the Temple of Heaven easily. Zhongshang shook his head. It doesn't matter then. Renbao handed him another box and said, just send this in the evening. Zhongshang nodded. It was finally over. Thousands of years of forbearance was finally coming to an end. The two sat facing each other for a while, and Zhongshang couldn't help but ask, are the people living well in your place? They don't have to worry about food and clothing. Renbao replied faintly. Advanced productivity has brought about a large number of living supplies. Here, a person is considered a good laborer if he can farm 10 mu of land a year. Including the livestock, it's only 20 mu of land. In our place, a person and machinery can farm 300 mu of land. Not to mention the output, 1 mu of your land can only produce 200 to 300 caddies of grain, while 1 mu of our land can produce 1,000 caddies of grain. Some high-yielding crops can even produce 4,000 to 5,000 caddies of grain. We only need 1% of your labor to feed the same population or even more. Zhongshang sat for a long time before saying, it's really fascinating. There's no need to be fascinated. You can see it. Renbao laughed. Seeing Zhongshang's surprised expression, he added, you can see it in a few years in Dayo. There's no need to come to our place. Zhongshang thought about it and laughed as well. That's not bad. If that day comes, let's get drunk for a few months to calm our hearts. Although it was just a simple question, Renbao's impression of Zhongshang improved a lot. This was because as a spirit will expert and a high-ranking member of the Temple of Heaven, his first question was, are the people living well? Afterward, the two chatted, mostly with Zhongshang asking questions and Renbao answering them. Zhongshang was very interested in the world that Renbao talked about. Through Renbao's description, Zhongshang's mind also outlined a world where people had endless food, wore exquisite clothes, rode on automatic walking machines, ran on land, went deep into the sea, and even soared in the sky. Countless hot-blooded men rode on their own ships, braved the wind and waves, and searched for the legendary One Piece. Every day, new information would be posted in League of Legends, such as which hero had discovered a new island, which hero had discovered a new route, which hero had discovered a new crop, which hero had charmed a few beautiful alien women. When the time was almost up, Zhongshang had to suppress his curiosity, send the box to the Temple of Heaven, and then come back to bring Renbao there. What they had just talked about filled him with anticipation for the future. Perhaps one day, he would be able to see that scene. After Zhongshang left, Renbao spread his hands. Why was this guy so interested in the League of Legends in One Piece? If he continued, it would be a battle between the League of Legends and the 7 warlords of the sea. Renbao got up, shook the wrinkles on his clothes, put his sunglasses back on his face, opened the window, and saw an extremely exquisite courtyard. After admiring it for a while, Zhongshang appeared in the courtyard. With a smile on his face, he said, Mr. Ren, the things have been delivered. Let's go and send them on their way. Renbao looked relaxed. Baidu search 081 Chinese network yen. No advertising words. Chapter 960. Renbao sat on a rock in front of the sea god temple. Not far in front of him was Zhongshang, looking in the direction of the temple with a gentle smile on his face. He had just witnessed a branch hall master enter the divine temple. A gust of wind blew past, and a malnourished, skinny man with dry hair and an abnormally pale face appeared in front of Renbao and Zhongshang. His body was wrapped tightly in a large black coat. "Deputy Palace Master, why don't you go in?" the man asked with a smile. "So it's Bo Hai. You can accompany me here to wait for a few people." Zhongshang immediately smiled. "I'm fine with it." Bo Hai turned to look at Renbao and asked softly, "What are you trying to do?" "You'll know soon." Zhongshang smiled and changed the topic. Bo Hai furrowed his brows and shook his head slightly. "You know my body's condition. I caught a cold on the way here. Let's go in and rest a bit." After saying that, he cupped his hands at Zhongshang. Zhongshang's expression darkened and he stopped talking. He turned around and watched Bo Hai enter the sea god temple, his eyes filled with regret. She wanted to help him, but it was a pity. Renbao watched everything coldly from the sidelines with a sneer on his face. This was really like the king of hell telling you to die at midnight, but who would be able to keep you alive until midnight? However, Zhongshang didn't ask them to stay after the rejection, which made Renbao very satisfied. Zhongshang was very wise to save those that he could and give up on those that he couldn't. The scariest thing these days was to have a lousy teammate. If that was the case, he might as well just leave and blow everyone up. Renbao watched coldly from the sidelines as the people came one by one. Some people began to stay by Zhongshang's side. Although they were puzzled, they still waited for Zhongshang's explanation. In the evening, in addition to Zhongshang and Renbao, there were 13 other people waiting outside the sea god temple. This included Su Wuming and Wen Shaoxing. To be honest, Renbao hoped that the two of them would go in so that he could blow them up and make the Empress happy. It could only be said that these two people were not fated to die. "It's time," Renbao said faintly as he got up from the rock and stretched. "Vice Palace Master, what's going on?" The one who spoke was a graceful woman in black with a veil over her face. This person was the Fusher Palace Master, Fei Yan. "I have a few words to say to everyone." Zhongshang turned around and said to everyone. Everyone's eyes narrowed as they knew that the show was about to begin. They had all seen how Zhongshang had been testing the Temple Lord all these years. These people were either trying to persuade Zhongshang to reconsider or simply standing on his side, which was why they were here. He didn't know what Zhongshang was going to say. They wouldn't want to start an internal strife, right? Zhongshang wouldn't be so unwise. While everyone was pondering, they saw Zhongshang carrying Renbao and speeding away. "Everyone, please take a step forward." "Hall Master Zhong, what are you trying to do?" A figure appeared in front of the celestial temple and shouted. "Qing Yang." Zhongshang ignored him and didn't stop. Everyone hesitated for a moment. A few of them gave Qing Yang a look before catching up to him. Qing Yang's face was filled with anger and resentment. What was this Zhongshang trying to do at this moment? In the main hall, the Temple Lord's face was gloomy, and his eyes flickered. What exactly was Zhongshang trying to do? He shouldn't have been kept alive all these years. The others either closed their eyes and remained silent, or their eyes flickered. Some people thought that Zhongshang was stopping the others outside and wondered if he was going to break ties with the Temple Lord. Some people were also thinking about Renbao, but unfortunately, there was no way to make him give in. What exactly did the Temple Lord want? Just as everyone was having all kinds of thoughts and Qin Yang was hesitating whether to catch up, Renbaqian pressed the button in his hand with a relaxed smile. At that moment, everyone felt a great sense of danger coming from under their feet. Their hair stood on end as they immediately ran forward with all their might. A loud, dull sound was heard almost at the same time as the ground shook. Almost instantly, the sea god temple disappeared. It was replaced by a pillar of fire that soared into the sky, mixed with broken bricks and stones. The ground was shaking and swaying as if an earth dragon was rolling under their feet. Cracks appeared on the ground as the flames surged underground, looking for a vent, and erupted with mud and gravel. With a loud sound, holes appeared one after another on the ground, and flames rose into the sky. A large amount of soil burned and turned into a rain of fire in the air. When they turned around and looked behind them, they saw that the world had completely changed. The sky was reflected in a fiery red, and the ground was like a nation of fire. Countless cracks and flames were spread all over it, and they were still increasing without any signs of abating. The shaking under their feet didn't stop, and noises, screams, and the sound of houses collapsing could be heard from the nearby fishing village. What the hell is happening? Everyone turned to look in that direction. The ground and air within a radius of more than a kilometer were filled with pillars of fire, flames, and scorched earth. Accompanied by continuous collapses and explosions, it was like purgatory. In particular, the original location of the sea god temple had become a nation of fire. Grayish-white smoke and all kinds of dust gradually formed a mushroom-like cloud in the sky along with the flames. Everyone looked ahead in horror. Renbaqian, who was wearing sunglasses, felt a little regretful that the explosion had been detonated underground. The scene seemed to be much smaller and less artistic. However, for these people, this artistic scene was already shocking beyond their expectations. He could feel that Zhongshang's body had completely stiffened. Even Zhongshang, one of the initiators, didn't expect the momentum to be so terrifying. This was coming from underground, and the Temple of Heaven was dozens of meters underground. If it was like this on the surface, then the people underground probably wouldn't even have their bones left. Zhongshang. What did you do? Su Wuming turned his head to look at Zhongshang and Renbaqian with a murderous look in his eyes. It seemed like he could draw his sword at any time. Everyone else also had a horrified look on their faces. The chief of the Temple of Heaven isn't a human, but a foreigner. For thousands of years, the Temple of Heaven has been influenced by foreigners and has become a weapon in their hands. Zhongshang said bluntly. What did you say? Everyone was stunned. Even the scorched earth in front of them didn't shock them as much as this sentence. Nonsense. Nonsense. Zhongshang, you colluded with outsiders to rebel and even killed the Hall chiefs. You are a sinner of the Temple of Heaven. A sharp shout came from not far away. Qin Yang's body was covered in scorch marks, and his face was covered in dirt. His eyes were flickering. Don't you know whether she's a foreigner or not? Do you really think that no one knows what happened 3,000 years ago? Zhongshang sneered. Nonsense. Qin Yang rebuked, and his eyes flickered even faster. I'll let you know and make you die convinced. The evidence that the chief of the Temple of Heaven is a foreigner has always been in my hands. Everyone, follow me. Zhongshang said to the crowd. I want to see what evidence you have. You clearly colluded with outsiders to rebel and still tried to deceive us. Zhongshang, you will die a horrible death. Qin Yang scolded. We will soon find out who will die. Zhongshang turned to look at him and sneered. Then, he led the way to the fishing village. At this time, nearly half of the fishing village had collapsed. Fortunately, the fishing village was made of wooden houses, and it was a distance away from the sea god temple. Thus, there were not many casualties. However, people were still panicking. Many powerful people appeared outside the village and looked at the area shrouded in flames with panic on their faces. When they saw Zhongshan and the others coming over, they calmed down and quickly asked, "Sirs, what happened? Go back first and do what you need to do. Don't panic. We will summon you later." Zhongshan waved his hand and asked everyone to retreat. "Qing Yang!" Su Wuming suddenly shouted. Everyone turned their heads and saw that Qing Yang, who had been following behind them and getting further and further away, had actually turned around and ran away. Ran away. After a few flashes, they could no longer see him. He didn't even dare to confront Zhongshan. Now that everyone knew what was going on, they immediately believed Zhongshan's words. Everyone was shocked and angry. They didn't expect the chief of the temple to be a foreigner. They didn't expect Qing Yang's branch to have known about it thousands of years ago. However, he had been hiding it for thousands of years because he was a foreigner. Su Wuming's face turned green and red. He shouted angrily and rushed straight into the sky. In just a moment, everyone felt a majestic sword intent coming from afar. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second, Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 961. After a while, Su Wuming returned with Qing Yang, who was covered in blood. Su Wuming's face was also livid. Qing Yang's reaction just now had already explained everything. However, he still wanted to see the evidence. With a silent atmosphere, everyone followed Zhongshan to the secret room in the mansion. At a glance, they saw the portraits on the wall. Unlike Renbaqian, they could tell at a glance that these portraits were similar to the chief of the Temple of Heaven. These are the previous chiefs of that branch. Zhongshan said faintly. Why is this happening? Someone asked subconsciously. No matter what they looked like when they were young, they actually looked so similar when they were old. Zhongshan silently pressed a few times on the wall, and 2 stone slabs on the ground directly flipped up, revealing a coffin below. You will know after seeing this. Zhongshan took out the coffin as he spoke, revealing a dried corpse inside. It wasn't rotten, but it was almost completely dehydrated, and its appearance couldn't be seen. This is the chief of the Temple of Heaven from 3,300 years ago, Zhongshan said without waiting for anyone to ask. 3,300 years ago. The chief of the Temple of Heaven. Everyone was shocked. How could the corpse of the chief of the Temple of Heaven from 3,300 years ago be here? When Xiaoxing suddenly said from behind the crowd, 3,300 years ago, the chief of the Temple of Heaven, Qing Lan, had a fierce battle with Fuidao, Jian Wuming, and Gong Yang Pinji. The 3 of them died, and she was seriously injured. On her way back to the Temple of Heaven, she accepted a disciple and died after explaining some matters. Her disciple, Qing Kong, later became the 21st chief of the Fida Temple. Zhongshan nodded slightly. As expected of Wen Xiaoxing, he was famous for his encyclopedic knowledge. Not bad. Back then, Qing Lan accepted a disciple, but in fact, this disciple was already prepared. For them, the human body is a vessel that can be abandoned and manipulated at any time. Originally, this body should have been destroyed, but Qing Lan needed some time to adapt to the new body after she had just changed her body. My ancestor found an opportunity to steal this body. You mean, our bodies are their vessels? Someone asked subconsciously. That's right. As he spoke, Zhongshan turned the body over, and everyone found that the back of the head was completely open, with some shrunken greenish-gray matter inside. The original brain tissue is almost gone, replaced by this substance. In order to confirm this, the patriarch specially stole a few corpses and opened them to compare, said Zhongshan. In fact, even if they didn't steal corpses for comparison, it wasn't the first time these people had beaten people's brains out. What about the internal organs? Renbochin frowned and suddenly asked. The internal organs are still there, just like a human, Zhongshang said. What does Mr. Ren know? It's somewhat similar to a creature that I've seen before. However, that creature is a parasite that lives in the chest cavity. It uses its body as a substitute for the internal organs and controls the body. Although it can move, it doesn't have any reaction to the outside world, Renbochin said. The corpse reminded him of the herdsmen and the jade-waisted slaves. Before the jade-waisted slaves transformed into butterflies, this was how they parasitized humans. He wondered if this alien race was related to the herders. After all, the herdsmen had always been monitoring the human race. If this alien race had some kind of connection with the herdsmen, then they had to be more careful. Hearing this, everyone's expressions turned ugly and they remained silent. Zhongshang's words were very credible. Although they couldn't prove that this corpse belonged to the former chief of the Temple of Heaven. Coupled with Qin Yang's reaction at that time, everyone couldn't even question him. With a sullen face, Su Wuming flicked his finger at Qin Yang, who was lying on the ground. After a while, Qin Yang's body moved and he woke up. What else do you have to say, Qin Yang? Su Wuming asked coldly. What Zhongshang said is false. He lied to you. Qin Yang, who had just woken up, didn't know what had happened. His first reaction was to insist that Zhongshang's words were false. Then why did you run? Someone sneered. At this time, everyone hated Qin Yang to the core. They didn't expect that the chief of the Temple of Heaven was a foreign race and that Qin Yang's branch had been following the chief's lead despite knowing about it. If it weren't for Zhongshang, everyone would still be in the dark. Qin Yang still wanted to quibble at this time. Qin Yang's face was ferocious as he suddenly shouted, Zhongshang is rebelling against his superiors, and you are all accomplices. You will all die a horrible death. Is Qin Chen's branch a foreign race? Su Wuming asked coldly, looking at him as if he was looking at a dead man. No. Qin Yang suddenly yelled. You know that no one can lie in front of me. It was a woman, Fei Yan, who spoke. Qin Yang looked at Fei Yan, then at Su Wuming and Zhongshang, and a sinister smile appeared on his face. You will regret this. Su Wuming flicked his finger in the air, and Qin Yang's head flew off as blood spurted out. I'm going to the Temple of Heaven to take a look, Su Wuming said to Zhongshang. Then, he looked at Renbochin and said, when I come back, I will give you an explanation. After speaking, Su Wuming turned and disappeared at the entrance of the secret room. A few others left one after another and followed Su Wuming. Zhongshang said to the remaining people, this is Mr. Ren. You came back this time because of him. Everyone nodded at Renbochin. In fact, they already knew about Renbochin. Even if they hadn't seen him before, as the chief of a temple, they had their own sources of information. Everyone, please wait here. I still have to go and appease the village. When everyone returned to the room above, Renbochin kicked a box on the ground and said, there are some things inside. Give them to those people. Now that there is fire poison underground, they will either die or become disabled if they come into contact with it. These things can weaken the poison. It doesn't matter if Su Wuming is dead, but there is still value in saving the others. When everyone heard this, they suddenly realized a problem. Could it be that he was the one who created that purgatory scene just now? It was unexpected, but it was also reasonable. Zhongshang didn't have such means. After Zhongshang left, everyone began to calm down from the shock brought by the shocking news that the chief of the Temple of Heaven was actually a foreigner. Some people also began to look at Renbochin curiously. They said that Mr. Ren is from the outside world. A man who looked like a gigolo asked. He indeed looked like a gigolo with sword-like eyebrows, starry eyes, red lips, and white teeth. He looked to be in his 20s. However, Renbochin guessed that his age wasn't like his appearance. Renbochin nodded slightly. Upon hearing his answer, everyone shifted their attention to Renbochin. After all, they still had to wait for Su Wuming to return. On the contrary, Renbochin, an outsider who was right in front of them, made them full of curiosity. Next, Renbochin began to helplessly answer everyone's questions. He repeated the rise of another branch of the human race, the chaotic star sea, the power struggle between the three races, the Summoner's Canyon, and Snow White and the seven Calabash brothers. It wasn't until dawn that Zhongshang returned, feeling slightly exhausted. It settled down for the time being. I didn't say anything about Qing Chen's branch being a foreigner. Everyone nodded. This kind of thing really had to be kept a secret. Go back and appease the people from your own branches, Zhongshang said. He wasn't willing to say anything else. After all, the chief of the Temple of Heaven, many of the sub-temple chiefs, and venerables had died, but they were safe and sound. It took him a lot of effort to suppress this matter. It was another noon before Su Wuming and the others returned. 2 broken crystal coffins were also brought back with them. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second, Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 962. Seeing the 2 crystal coffins, everyone gathered around. One of the coffins was completely damaged. Only the upper half of the corpse was left, and the lower half was missing. Looking at the wound, it looked like it had been smashed by a stone. Although the remains of a spirit-will expert couldn't be destroyed easily, it would be a different story if there was a nuclear bomb exploding on the head. The other coffin was relatively intact, and the corpse inside was mostly intact. Although these 2 corpses weren't intact, their faces were completely preserved. At a glance, everyone could tell that the appearance of these 2 bodies was somewhat similar to that of the chief of the Temple of Heaven, the 21st chief of the Fida Temple and the 29th deputy chief of the main temple. When Shaoxing glanced at them and immediately recognized their identities. The 21st chief of the Fida Temple. Isn't this? Everyone already knew that this was the disciple of the mummified corpse below. According to Zhongshang, this was the body vessel of the chief of the Temple of Heaven, Qinglan. They didn't expect her body to still exist in the Temple of Heaven and be so well preserved. The Temple of Heaven is gone. We dug down and found these 2. There was a secret room under the Temple of Heaven that we never knew existed, someone said. Fei Yan glanced at it and said with a relaxed expression, just in time. Everything will be clear once we cut it open. Renbochin also stood aside curiously, waiting to see what it would look like after it was cut open. These foreign races controlled the human body through the brain. Everything was no different from a living person, which gave Renbochin a strange feeling. It inexplicably made him think of a Gundam. The foreign races were the pilots, and the human body was the Gundam. He didn't expect the fantasy of the comic to be presented in front of him in such a way. It was somewhat ironic. Not far away from him, the crowd had already tossed half a coffin lid to the side, revealing half a body. These 2 bodies were soaked in an unknown liquid, someone said after checking the wound. Someone checked the wound and said, if it was an intact body, this kind of liquid would not stick to the body. However, there would be some residue in the wound on the damaged body. Su Wuming looked at the 2 bodies solemnly, stretched out his finger, and drew a line in the air. A sword intent popped out from his finger like an invisible sword cutting through the air. A line suddenly appeared horizontally from the bridge of the nose on the head of the half-body. Someone reached out and gently plucked the upper half off. Hiss! The room was instantly filled with the sound of people gasping. Everyone's expression changed. Half of the head was covered in a greenish-black liquid. Most importantly, there was still half a person in the greenish-black liquid. It was half the size of a finger. Su Wuming's sword just happened to slash across the waist of the little person. Both its hands and lower body disappeared, while its upper body was indistinguishable as to whether it was a man or a woman. The little person's entire body was wrapped in a greenish-gray liquid, and it seemed to feel pain as the lower half of the person's body was still trembling slightly. It really is an outsider. This thing is alive. Everyone cried out. There was a foreign race in a human's mind. This scene was enough to shock everyone, not to mention that the foreign race was alive. The half-human's face twitched slightly, and his eyelids trembled. Everyone raised their guard. These things were using humans as containers. Who knew if they would suddenly wake up and counterattack? Renbochin immediately hid behind Zhongshan and used him as a meat shield. However, that did not happen. The half-human trembled a few times and then stopped moving. After a while, someone said, "It's dead." Renbochin peeked out from behind Zhongshan and confirmed that there was no threat. He then went to the side of the head that had been cut open and looked inside. He saw a greenish-black liquid slowly flowing out, which looked very viscous. The lower half of the foreign race's body was inside. What caught Renbochin's attention was that this foreign race actually had a tail, or rather a bundle of tails. Countless white filaments extended from the tailbone and pierced into various parts of the head, making half of the head look like it was covered with spider webs. Renbochin guessed that this was how this foreign race controlled the human body, which was indeed similar to the jade-waisted slaves. Before the jade-waisted slaves matured, they also lived in the human body. However, they had almost no reaction to the outside world, had no ability to think, and were completely like walking corpses. The one in front of them was much more advanced. Everyone in the room was speechless for a long time before they burst into an uproar again. Now that everything had been proven, everyone was no longer the same. They didn't expect that one of the founders of the Temple of Heaven was actually a foreign race. They didn't expect that the Temple of Heaven had been controlled and toyed with for thousands of years. How could these people, who had always been secretly controlling the direction of the human race, endure this? Su Wuming closed his eyes, stood there for a moment, and suddenly opened them to look at Renbochin. "I have nothing to say now. I just have one more thing to ask. Can the human race succeed?" "Of course." Renbochin looked quite relaxed. "As long as I have enough time. Believe it or not, I will blow up the foreign race with a railgun." "That's good." Su Wuming seemed to be relieved. "I said that I would give you an explanation after the matter is investigated, and I should give you one. Since the human race still has all of you, I have no regrets." Su Wuming. Everyone became anxious when they heard this. However, Su Wuming didn't care about them. He cupped his fists at Renbochin and then at everyone else. "Too many people are waiting for me." After Su Wuming finished speaking, he didn't react anymore and fell straight down. His vitality quickly dissipated from his body. Everyone couldn't bear it. They didn't expect Su Wuming to die just like that. Moreover, after everything came to light, the Temple of Heaven lost more than half of its high-end combat power, including Su Wuming, who was its top combat power. Zhongshan's face turned gloomy as he recalled the conversation he had with Su Wuming the night before. He had given them the tools to guard against the fire poison and also brought Renbochin's words. As long as they disappeared from there, he wouldn't pursue them. Unfortunately, Su Wuming was so proud and arrogant that he wouldn't accept this kind of charity. "I'm not afraid of death, and I don't mind dying. If that person can really bring the human race out of this cage, it doesn't matter if I die so that the Temple of Heaven won't be implicated. Besides, the people who have died in my hands over the years are still waiting for me to go down." Too many people had died in his hands over the years. If it was really for the sake of the human race, then the sword in his heart would be extremely pure and unstained with blood. However, if even the chief of the Temple of Heaven was a foreign race, then what about what he had done over the years? What about those who had died in his hands? His faith was gone, and his sword was stained with blood. Everything would end here. Sigh. Zhongxiang's gaze swept to the other person in the room. With a gentle smile on his face, Wen Shaoxing cupped his hands at everyone and said, "I'll take my leave first." After saying this, he died with a smile on his face. Everyone in the room felt a chill run down their spines. Zhongxiang closed his eyes and recalled what Wen Shaoxing had said, pillow talk. The Temple of Heaven doesn't lack experts. If we die, there will be other experts to replace us. It will just take some time. However, the Temple of Heaven is everyone's temple. If it's damaged, everyone will be damaged. This time, we have offended them badly, and we have to answer for it. Otherwise, if we don't say it out loud, we may have to pay for it 100 times over in the future. If he hadn't made that request that day, there would still have been room for negotiation. However, since it was made, it has taken root in our hearts. In that case, it's better to end things here. Ren Baqin watched the two people die, sighed slightly, turned around, and left. For a moment, he was dispirited. Chapter 963. If Ren Baqin didn't have that identity, Su Wuming and Wen Shaoxing might not have died. However, at this moment, both of them made their choice and gave Ren Baqin an explanation. Firstly, the temple master of the Temple of Heaven was from a different race, and all the people from the Temple of Heaven had blood on their hands. Secondly, the Temple of Heaven was everyone's Temple of Heaven. It had been passed down for thousands of years. In a world that was about to change, one wrong step would destroy it. The temple master of the Heaven Law Temple was dead. Both of them must die. In this way, the Temple of Heaven would have no worries. Zhongxiang understood that some of them had thought of it, some of them hadn't, but they would all understand in the end. Ren Baqin understood. When he reached the door, he felt a little dispirited. Let's call it a day. This explanation was enough. As for Yun Yuhan, he wasn't in the mood to find trouble with her. He wouldn't feel anything if he killed Su Wuming and Wen Shaoxing. However, the fact that the two of them had committed suicide just like that made Ren Baqin feel a little uncomfortable. His original thoughts were gone, and he couldn't be bothered to care about anything else. The next thing to do was for Zhongxiang and the others to pacify the villagers and select experts to fill in for each hole. Even the few venerables who survived returned to their respective sub-palaces to stabilize the situation. It had to be said that the Temple of Heaven's heritage of 7,000 years was indeed incomparable to those so-called famous sections. Despite losing most of their top experts, they were still able to replenish the 39 spirit wool experts. However, their strength had been greatly reduced. Most of the newly selected hall masters had not even condensed a divine weapon, and none of them had the strength of Su Wuming. Ren Baqin didn't care about these things. If the Temple of Heaven was weaker, it would be safer. For the past 2 days, he had been strolling around the beach when he had nothing to do. As a native of the Northeast, the sea was his eternal dream. It was probably because of Hai Zi's words, facing the sea, spring will bloom. Sometimes, Ren Baqin felt that he was still a bit of a scholar. The sea in this world was very clear, and the beach was also very white. If it wasn't for the strange fish that were 2 to 3 meters long, Ren Baqin really wanted to go down and try. However, Ren Baqin eventually dismissed this idea. Beside him was a young man with squinted eyes. He had a smile on his face and his eyes were squinted, making it hard for others to see what was in his eyes. He was a disciple of the sect, and his name was Jiao Ping. Ren Baqin looked into the distance. He was curious about the turbulence that was far away from the coast, but he didn't ask about it. It was better not to expose such ignorance in front of others. He could just ask the rearguard commandery to gather information about the turbulence layer. That night, Yun Yuhan, who had been missing for 2 days, appeared in front of him again. At this time, she was already the chief of Kain Temple. She washed away the heavy eyeshadow that was rarely seen in this world, and only applied light makeup and lipstick. Her hair was loose behind her, and her purple coat was changed to a matching color. She looked much purer and more attractive. However, behind this beautiful face was a rather twisted soul. Renbachien was sitting in front of the window, pondering over some matters. When he heard the knock on the door, he was surprised to see her. He couldn't figure out what she was here for. "Can I go in?" Yun Yuhan had a smile on her face. She seemed no different from before. However, Renbachien felt that there was something in her smile. Renbachien moved aside to let her in. He leaned against the doorpost with his arms crossed and said frivolously, "It's already so late. Are you from the pillow booth? If I say yes, do you want it?" Yun Yuhan's eyes were full of charm. Renbachien looked at her seriously. Seeing that she wasn't joking, he said, "Let's go. Just don't appear in front of me in the future." He was guessing whether it was her own idea or someone else's idea. However, it was really meaningless to use this trick now. Yun Yuhan's body spun as if she was dancing. Her posture was graceful, like an epiphyllum blooming at noon, and the beauty of her body was fully revealed. After 3 gentle spins, Yun Yuhan appeared in front of Renbachien. She stroked his chest with her fingers and asked softly, "Won't you regret it if I leave? Beauty is a woman's best weapon, and I have the most powerful weapon in the world. Unfortunately, most men in this world aren't worthy of me. Are you switching from arrogance to deference?" Renbachien sneered. "No, I'm just picking out the tallest among the dwarfs," Yun Yuhan said teasingly. Renbachien's anger was almost ignited by her, and he gritted his teeth in hatred. "There was a way to heaven, but you refused to take it. There was no door to hell, but you insisted on coming." Renbachien's hand climbed onto her chest, pinched it lightly, and flicked his finger. Yun Yuhan immediately let out a bell-like laugh as her body danced around Renbachien. He had to admit that Yun Yuhan's dancing was excellent. Coupled with her seemingly pure face and her strange temperament, she had enough charm to move people's hearts. From time to time, Yun Yuhan would gently touch him with her arms or some part of her body, which made the fire in his heart burn even more fiercely. His hands suddenly fell on Yun Yuhan's waist and gently pulled, and the belt that was wrapped around her waist immediately fell off. This kind of belt that was as wide as a palm was called a kneecap. One of its functions was to press down on clothes. When the kneecap fell off, Yun Yuhan's clothes were also opened. Although they were still hanging on her body, her undergarment was exposed. Half of her gown was more alluring than being naked. Under the oil lamp, the blush on Yun Yuhan's face seemed to deepen. However, her movements weren't affected at all. After gently dancing a few times, her clothes slipped off just like that, revealing half of her body that was as white as jade. There was only one undergarment on her entire body. When she turned around, one could see 2 buttocks that made people want to slap them. Yun Yuhan also took the opportunity to hook her arms around his neck. Her chest was tightly pressed against his chest, and a pair of soft hands rested on the back of his neck. "Is this weapon powerful?" Renbachien's fingers slid across Yun Yuhan's body. Her skin was as smooth as warm jade. Although he hadn't seen many women, there were still quite a few. There was no need to mention the women on earth. The Empress was extremely beautiful, and there were also Axian and Lin Chaola. There was no need to mention Lin Chaola as she couldn't afford an A. However, Lin Chaola's transformation was still quite a sight to behold. The Empress and Axian had something in common. Both of them had cold temperaments and gave off a heroic vibe. Although it was perfect, the more the figure was, the less it would be. However, the lines were a little less soft and a little more sharp. After all, Aboriginal women were always full of wildness. However, the person in front of him was different. She gave off the feeling that she could be rubbed into her body. In general, Yun Yuhan might not be stronger than the Empress, but she wasn't bad either. The important thing was that she was a completely different type from the Empress. With such a woman clinging to him and only wearing an undergarment, the rest of her skin was exposed in front of him, allowing him to do whatever he wanted. Renbochin felt the anger in his heart grow. With a flick of his finger, the strap of Yun Yuhan's undergarment was broken. The upper half of the undergarment immediately fell and got stuck in front of her chest, sticking closely to him. "Will you regret it if I leave now?" Yun Yuhan asked in a charming voice. "Where do you want to go now?" Renbochin flipped his palm, and a metal chain came out from his palm, firmly entangling Yun Yuhan. "Even if you don't tie me up, I won't run away." Yun Yuhan chuckled. The cold touch gave her goosebumps. "That's hard to say." Renbochin took a step back and looked at the tied-up Yun Yuhan. The metal chain was still wandering around her body, just enough to highlight the bulge in front of her chest. The important parts weren't covered at all. Renbochin placed Yun Yuhan on a chair, and the metal chain tied her to the chair according to her will. It then wrapped around her legs and gently pulled them apart. Yun Yuhan blushed and looked at him coquettishly. "So you like this kind of thing?" At this time, Yun Yuhan, her posture, and the metal chain on her body were a scene that no man could stand. Renbochin was a man, so he naturally couldn't stand it either. He closed the door, picked up something from the table, hid it behind him, and walked toward Yun Yuhan. With a blush on her face, Yun Yuhan whispered, "This is my first time. Don't worry. Just stay like this." Renbochin smiled and showed her the hand behind him. He was holding a feather. He grabbed Yun Yuhan's foot and gently scratched it with the feather. Yun Yuhan subconsciously wanted to shrink her foot. However, Renbochin grabbed her foot and kept brushing the sole of her foot with the feather. Yun Yuhan began to pant. 3 minutes later, Yun Yuhan's face began to change, but Renbochin still had no intention of stopping. "What? What are you doing?" Yun Yuhan wanted to struggle, but Renbochin pressed her down. "Don't move. My metal chain isn't very strong. If it breaks, I'm afraid I'll die." Yun Yuhan didn't dare to struggle, but her muscles trembled. Being tied up and scratched. Everyone knew what it felt like to be scratched. Renbochin's current residence was Zhongshang's residence. When Yun Yuhan went to Renbochin's room, Zhongshang wasn't there. When he came back, he found out about it. Zhongshang shook his head slightly and frowned. What was Yun Yuhan going to do? He naturally knew what Yun Yuhan was going to do. However, he didn't know why she was doing this. What happened before was in the past. Su Wuming and Wen Shaoxing had ended everything with their deaths. In any case, Renbochin would let go of this matter. His performance in the past 2 days also showed this. Zhongshang frowned and walked to the front of Renbochin's courtyard. A figure appeared from the darkness. "Master." Zhongshang didn't pay attention to his disciple. At this moment, a burst of panting came from the courtyard. Zhongshang shook his head. No matter what, this was Yun Yuhan's own choice. However, before he could leave, Yun Yuhan's panting became stranger and stranger, and it was finally mixed with a miserable groan. Zhongshang's frown deepened. After standing there for a long time, Yun Yuhan's panting was almost inaudible and was replaced by miserable groans from time to time as if she was trying her best to endure something. Zhongshang sighed. "No matter what you want to do, why do you have to do this?" It wasn't until the sky was getting brighter that Renbochin released Yun Yuhan, who was tied to the chair, with satisfaction. "Pervert." Yun Yuhan cursed angrily with tears in her eyes. When such an extreme spirit will expert cried and complained to Rinpoche with such an expression, coupled with her sparkling white body, it was enough to ignite anyone's flame. At this time, Yun Yuhan's body was covered with crystal clear sweat, and the ground was also wet. The moment Rinpoche let go, Yun Yuhan felt all the muscles in her body twitch and moan. For a spirit will expert, this was simply impossible. However, this night was simply a nightmare for her. The people outside thought so as well. However, their perceptions of the incident were a little different. Rinpoche confidently said to Yun Yuhan, "It's right for men to be perverted." Yun Yuhan's tears fell at once. This night's encounter was 100 times more humiliating than she had originally thought. In other words, there wasn't any humiliation in her original thoughts. This was her own choice. She wasn't lying at all. Most of the men in this world weren't worthy of her. She just wanted to give it a try, but unfortunately, almost none of them caught her eye. She had to pick the tallest among the dwarves, and Rinpoche was that tall man. However, the gap between imagination and reality was really too big. Yun Yuhan staggered and cried as she left, cursing him as a pervert as she left. All the muscles in her body were twitching and moaning, making her unable to even walk steadily. For the whole night, she had to endure the pain of the itch and forcibly control herself from breaking the iron chain. One could imagine how difficult it was. She was on the verge of collapsing. Outside, Jiao Ping saw Yun Yuhan's posture as she left, shook his head slightly, and the smile on his face faded a little. He then got someone to tell Zhongxiang about this. Rinpoche naturally didn't know that he couldn't escape the title of a pervert. At this time, he was quite happy, humming a tune, and in a good mood. There was a road to heaven, but you didn't take it. Do you really think I'm a rabbit that eats grass? This night was much more satisfying than whipping her. Seeing such a woman beg for mercy in front of him with tears streaming down her face, this good mood lasted until noon, and he was beaming when he went out to meet people. Jiao Ping looked at the beaming Rinpoche and thought of Yun Yuhan, who went out crying, and shook his head slightly. This foreign guide. Sigh. Forget it, let's not talk about it. After lunch, Rinpoche brought the remaining crystal coffin back to his room. That day, everyone wanted to cut off the head of this body and burn it. However, Rinpoche stopped them. Such a specimen couldn't be easily let go. He brought the coffin back to Earth, got someone to buy a special freezer, and froze the corpse inside. Now that Dao had its own foreign scientists, there was no need to trouble the Messier 87 department for everything. In particular, this foreign race was quite sensitive, and Rinpoche wasn't prepared to hand this thing over to others. In the future, when the laboratory had enough staff and equipment, it would be better for him to research it himself. For the next few days, Rinpoche had a good rest on Earth and went straight back to Dao. As for the Temple of Heaven, when everything was back on track, Zhongxiang would naturally go to Lan City to see him. Furthermore, he had to arrange for 2 people to enter the Temple of Heaven. However, what made him the happiest was that he could go back to see the Empress immediately. Although this period of time wasn't long, he had experienced a lot, and it felt as if he had been away from the Empress for a long time. He couldn't wait to go back and see the woman in red who always had a cold face. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second, Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 964. Let's go. He waved his hand. Anyway, we'll see each other after a while. Indeed, I also want to see the current Lan City and what the Sleepless City looks like. Zhongxiang laughed. In addition to Rinpoche, Zhongxiang and a few of the sub-temple chiefs were around, and the rest were busy with the affairs of the Temple of Heaven. After such a huge change, the remaining people were so busy that their feet never left the ground. Renbochin put his hands behind his back and looked up at the sky. The weather was pretty good. Dark clouds stretched for miles, and not even a trace of the sun could be seen. Fortunately, they had prepared a horse carriage. Although it wasn't fast, there was still a place to shelter them from the wind and rain. Although Zhongshang asked him to stay until after the rain, he was no longer in the mood to stay any longer. Renbochin nodded at everyone, turned around, got into his car, and returned to Deo. There were 2 carriages in total, and one of them was the Fushi Palace Master Fei Yan, a graceful woman with a black veil covering her face. However, Renbochin had seen half of her face when she turned around. It was covered with red wounds that were the size of a baby's mouth. The wounds crisscrossed and looked somewhat terrifying. Less than an hour after they set off, bean-sized raindrops began to fall from the sky, hitting the carriage with pitter-pattering sounds. The dark clouds in the sky seemed to be pressing down on their heads. The 2 carriages also stopped by the roadside. In such a heavy rain, the coachman was an expert and could see the road clearly, but the horse could not. "Come in and take a seat," Renbochin said. Jiao Ping sat in the carriage and placed the oil jacket and bamboo hat aside. The oil coat was a kind of tree oil that was applied to the surface of the clothes. It was considered a raincoat in this era, but it could only protect against drizzling rain. In just a moment, Jiao Ping's body was penetrated. "This is..." Jiao Ping looked at the lines of words floating in the air in the car, and surprise flashed in his eyes. "It's a book from our place." Renbochin laughed. Renbochin had brought the projection books back to kill time. Now that the 3D projection chip had been miniaturized and the technology was more mature, the previous transitional equipment that used spray as a projection carrier was naturally eliminated. Jiao Ping looked eagerly at the words floating in the air. Even though he had no idea what was written on them, this scene was enough for him to look forward to Renbochin's world. Renbochin smiled and continued to look at the words in front of him. He is reading a mystery book. As he watched the familiar scenes and plot of the story, even though he was in another world, he felt like he was still on Earth. However, some of the things that appeared in the book were still vague. Although he would learn about the changes on Earth every time he returned to Earth, there were all kinds of new technologies and products on Earth in the past 10 years. There were too many things that he had not come into contact with. For example, Renwanyan's New Century company had launched a music game. In the game, players would use various weapons to cut down incoming blocks to the beat. That's right, this was a virtual reality game that was popular more than a decade ago. If it weren't for mind control technology, virtual reality technology would have become a national product. However, after the birth of mind control technology, the largest virtual reality technology companies fell from the clouds to the bottom in just a few years. No matter how immersive virtual reality was, it was still fake. Mind control technology, on the other hand, could turn the false into the real. By directly projecting it into the mind, it could allow people to have the same feedback as reality. Therefore, in a short period of time, it replaced the near-mature virtual reality. This was the case with the newly launched game. Back then, virtual reality equipment was all the rage. At this time, it had been transferred to mind control equipment and immediately became the most popular game. Not only could people follow the rhythm of the game and hack at the oncoming balls, but they could also practice the accuracy, strength, evasion, and reaction ability of their attacks in this way. It was said that Renbochin's parents learned a set of swordsmanship from it. When the two swords were combined, they were invincible. Renbochin was at a loss when he heard this news. After watching the video, he pondered for a long time and came to a very tangled conclusion that he might not be a match for his parents. This was just an example. Over the past 10 years, the technological development of Earth had never stagnated, but Renbochin hadn't kept up with these changes. This feeling of disconnection often appeared in Renbochin's mind. After 4 days, Rinpoche finally returned to the border between Great Xia and the Yun nation. This journey took half a day, but the return journey took 4 days. Firstly, the carriage was slow. Secondly, they had to cross the mountains to get here, but they had to take the official road to get back. Rinpoche also paid attention to the official road of Great Xia. It was mainly paved with stones that were about 50 centimeters thick. The road was about 3 meters wide, was a little shabby, and was very bumpy when the carriage ran over it. Great Xia had 4 border checkpoints in this area, namely Halong City, Mishan Pass, Pingxiang City, and Jinghong City. Originally, there were 200,000 soldiers stationed there. However, there were only 50,000 of them now. These 50,000 soldiers were currently cowering in the city, trembling. The generals of several cities lingered at the top of the city walls every day and didn't dare to relax. The reason was the 30,000 Aboriginal soldiers below the city walls and the huge flag with the words, Dayo, written on it. When the Great Xia general who was stationed here learned that Dayo had led the army to attack, his hands trembled and he almost pulled out his beard. An army of 200,000 soldiers might not be able to stop 30,000 Aboriginals, let alone 50,000 soldiers that were distributed in 4 cities. The flag and the Aboriginal army made the Great Xia general's face turn pale. The Aboriginal army normally didn't fly this kind of flag when they traveled. This kind of flag would only be flown under one circumstance, when the Emperor of Dayo personally led the army. Qi Zixiao was in this army. This time, the Great Xia general really pulled out a bunch of his beard. However, he couldn't care less. He hurriedly rushed to the top of the city wall and looked down. After which, he arranged most of the troops at the front with a pale face, turned around, and went back to drink and get ready to get drunk. However, to everyone's surprise, the Aboriginals didn't attack the city. They didn't go anywhere else either. Instead, they set up camp not far away from the city. This made the people of Great Xia rack their brains, but they still couldn't figure out what exactly they wanted to do. While carefully observing the movements of the Aboriginals, he quickly sent a letter to the imperial court to ask for help. Of course, he also knew that it was useless to ask for help as the imperial court simply didn't have any soldiers to send. All he wanted was for the imperial court to treat his family well. For the next few days, none of the Great Xia generals could rest well. They were afraid that the evil star not far from the city would suddenly attack. Only the general who led the army was the calmest. He drank wine all day long. In any case, if they didn't die, they would live forever. They couldn't defeat them, so they could only resign themselves to fate. After 6 days, while the people of Great Xia were feeling uneasy, they saw 2 carriages coming from afar. They passed by the city wall and directly entered the Dayo barracks under the leadership of a group of winged cavalry warriors. At this time, the people of Great Xia finally knew what this Dayo army was here for. They actually ran to the border checkpoint of Great Xia to pick up people. They didn't pay any attention to them at all and directly ignored their existence. This made them feel extremely humiliated, but at the same time, they felt a little lucky. The other party really wasn't here to fight. Then, they became curious. With such a large force and Qi Zixiao personally coming out, who exactly are they welcoming? Your Majesty, I miss you very much. Rinpoche smiled and gave the Empress a hug. The Empress felt the warmth of his body and finally felt at ease. Then, she looked at the man and woman following behind him. Especially that woman. Fei Yan, Zhaoping, the chief of the Fuji Temple of the Temple of Heaven, greets your Majesty. Both of them were very respectful. Fei Yan took off his veil, revealing a face full of crisscrossed scars. From the eyes down, there was almost no place that was unscathed. The Empress glanced at the 2 of them and said, "Thank you for your trouble. Someone, bring the 2 of you to rest." On the way back, Rinpoche had already informed the Empress about the situation through the radio. Therefore, she wasn't surprised by the presence of the two of them. After the two of them were brought away, the Empress looked at the smiling Rinpoche and immediately pulled a long face. "Men, hang him up for this emperor." Rinpoche asked, "Your Majesty, what are you doing?" "Hang him up and beat him up. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second, Booksellers Mobile." Chapter 965. Ah! Rinpoche felt a sharp pain in his buttocks as the Empress kicked him again. "Who asked you to run around? Who asked you to fall into a trap? Who asked you to take so long to come back? Are you enjoying yourself outside and forgetting to go home?" At this time, Rinpoche's hands and feet were hanging upside down. The Empress stood there, cursed, and kicked him every time she thought about it. Rinpoche felt wronged and said, "I didn't want to run around. I didn't want to fall into a trap. I didn't want to stay here for so long. You still dare to talk back." The Empress kicked him again with a cold face. "I was wrong. A real man was someone who could be soft and tough. Do you think you weren't wrong?" The Empress kicked him again. "No, no, no, I was wrong." Rinpoche looked remorseful. "I'll pay attention next time. Next time. You can't go anywhere after you go back." The Empress kicked him again. "Okay, I won't go anywhere," Rinpoche whispered. It seemed like the Empress was really frightened this time, or else she wouldn't have such a big reaction. The Empress kicked him a few more times and sat on a chair to rest. After thinking about it, she stood up and kicked him again. "Do you think I don't know about you and Tongjin going to a brothel? I won't go next time. Also, what's with that club membership card in your pocket? Do you think I don't know? I've checked." The Empress kicked him a few more times. "It's a place to drink tea and chat." Rinpoche tried to remain calm. "Still talking." The Empress kicked him again. "What's that place?" "I'm curious, so I went to take a look." Rinpoche looked docile. "Also, why didn't you brush your teeth before going to bed?" The Empress kicked him again. Rinpoche was confused. "Your Majesty, other things are fine, but is this even considered a problem? You snore while sleeping. You even stole my blanket. You even punched me once." Rinpoche was speechless. Rinpoche didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "Your Majesty, you just want to kick me, right?" Although she didn't use much force, her kicks were like hot wheels, and Rinpoche felt that his butt was already swollen. "Yes, I want to kick you." The Empress didn't hide it at all. "Your Majesty, you are too straightforward." After being hung and kicked for 12 hours, Rinpoche was finally put down. Both his legs were numb. Rinpoche wanted to cry, but no tears came out. At first, the Empress was still looking for an excuse. Later on, she didn't even look for an excuse anymore. The Empress seemed to be addicted to kicking. Heavenly Tao was indeed a good reincarnation. Let's see who it would spare. He had just tied someone up to tickle him, and when he came back, he was tied up, hung up, and kicked. Fortunately, the Empress finally calmed down. In fact, the Empress calmed down after kicking him a few times. She only wanted to kick him after that. She lay on the bed and closed her eyes for a while. When she woke up, the pain had finally subsided. Fei Yan and Zhao Ping bade farewell and returned to the Temple of Heaven, while the army turned around and returned to the Yun nation. Right now, the army was still in the territory of Great Xia. He couldn't always treat this place as his own territory. On the way back, Rinpoche finally understood what had happened during this period of time. For example, Lin Chaola and Xanjia. You don't have to persuade me. The punishment has already been meted out. How can it be changed overnight? Seeing that Rinpochen had the intention to speak, the Empress immediately stopped him. Moreover, meritorious service will be rewarded, and mistakes will be punished. If the two of them are not punished, it will seem like I'm not clear about my rewards and punishments. Rinpochen spread his hands. The Empress's words had left him speechless. At that time, in his opinion, the two of them didn't do anything wrong. It could only be said that the other party's preparations were too unexpected. However, this matter was already a foregone conclusion. He could only visit the two of them when he had the time. Fortunately, with their status, they wouldn't suffer any grievances even if they went to the mine. Especially Lin Chaola. As for Li Yuanzhu, he would write her a letter another day. As for Lin Yu, forget it, he would just ignore her. What Rinpochen really cared about was another matter, which was the order that the Empress had once given. The Yun nation, which had just settled down, was once again stirred up by this sudden blow. On the way back, Rinpochen deliberately entered two cities. Although the people in the cities were still doing what they were supposed to do, he could still see some clues from their eyes and some of their avoidance reactions. Rinpochen couldn't do anything about this matter. He could only continue to stabilize the Yun nation and use time to change the minds of the people there. Your Majesty, do you want to visit them incognito? Rinpochen suggested excitedly. Just the two of us. We can understand the situation of the Yun nation in detail so that we can have a good idea in the future. Do you mean to let me run around with you with such a big belly? The Empress glared at him. Rinpochen was suddenly speechless. Well, the Empress's belly wasn't big yet, and it looked like she was only 5 or 6 months pregnant. However, it was indeed inconvenient to go out. This suggestion was rejected, and the Empress now strictly prohibited Rinpochen from running around. In the end, they could only enter the city when they were close to it to see the living conditions of the people of the Yun nation. As for the invitations from the warlords of the Yun nation, they were all rejected. It took them a few days to return to Pingdu. After resting for a day, they set off again. The Empress sat in the carriage, lifted the curtain, looked at the wide road outside, and praised, "This road is really well built." The road from Lan City to the Yun nation was a 4-lane cement road that was nearly 10 meters wide. Walking on it, one could see everything in front and behind, and the wide road made one feel at ease. Apart from other things, just the width of the road alone was incomparable to any other country. One had to know that the official roads in Great Xia were only about 3 meters wide, and the important areas were only 4 meters wide. After all, quarrying and building roads required a lot of manpower and material resources. Mining, chiseling, and transporting were all very time-consuming and laborious. As for the smoothness of the road, it was needless to say. There were almost no bumps on this kind of cement road, which minimized the wear and tear of the vehicles and the fatigue of the people. At the same time, the speed of the vehicles could be greatly increased. The people of the Yun nation were astonished by just looking at this road. This is only the first road. In the future, such roads will be paved all over Dayo, Rinpochen said with a smile. Your Majesty, it's your turn. The Empress turned to look at the chessboard and asked, "Where's my elephant? We exchanged our stones before." Rinpochen pointed to the side. When did you exchange it? Why don't I remember? The Empress looked at him with a calm face. Just now. You kicked my pawn, and I sent it flying with an aerial cannon. Rinpochen felt that the Empress's memory was worrisome. Could pregnancy affect her memory? It didn't happen. You lied to me. The Empress gently tapped her finger on the table, and an elephant immediately flew back to the chessboard. After she ate Rinpochen's rook, she turned to look out of the window and said, I would like to see the day when this road is full of vehicles. Just like what we see on Earth. He stared at the chessboard and gnashed his teeth for a long time. Then, he used his horse to kick away one of the cannons from the Empress before laughing heartily and saying, "Very soon. Your Majesty will be able to see tractors running around. Your Majesty, your cannons are gone." The Empress turned to look at the chessboard and then at him. "How did your horse kick away my cannon?" "It's here." "No, your horse was there." The Empress placed his horse back in the position it was in a few games ago and said, "You are becoming more and more shameless in chess recently." Ren Baqin was speechless. "Your Majesty, are you sure you're not talking about yourself? Can we play chess for a while?" After a while, the Empress said, "Checkmate." Ren Baqin grinned. He couldn't continue this game. "You lost, so you have to promise me one thing." The Empress said. Ren Baqin sighed and said, "Please say it, Your Majesty." "Come, dance a striptease for me." The Empress lay horizontally in the chariot, supported her head with her arm, and looked at Ren Baqin with great interest. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second, Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 966. After returning to Lawn City, he wanted to settle various things, but the Empress dragged him into the palace hall. It took a full 7 days before he was carried out. After a round of emergency treatment by the clinic, Ren Baqin recuperated for 2 days before he started to deal with all kinds of things while trembling. He hadn't been gone for long this time, only half a month, but 9 days had passed since he had returned. That was close to a month's time, and there were many things that he had to deal with. The laboratory, the rearguard commandery, the Department of Commerce, the new city, and the academy were all busy for a month. During this period of time, the commander of the palace guards had also changed. It was a woman called Jiang Ningyun. Ren Baqin had seen this woman before. Back then, he had participated in a lantern-grabbing contest after the New Year's, and he had been smashed by someone with flying shoes. That time, the champion was Jiang Ningyun. She was a talented commoner, but her strength was on par with Hong Xian's. After that, she joined the Protectorate of the Northeast and reached the Cardinal Heaven level within a few years. She had outstanding military exploits and was now transferred back by the Empress to be the commander of the Imperial Guards. The Aboriginals didn't have ugly women, and Jiang Ningyun was the same. She was full of wildness and beauty, and there was a heroic spirit in her eyes. Especially since he had just been transferred back from the Yun Nation, the smell of blood lingered on his body for a long time. However, Ren Baqin still felt that the bespectacled lady was more pleasing to the eye. It was already July in Dayo. Ren Baqin counted with his fingers and realized that he had been in this world for exactly 6 years. When he first arrived, it was July of the 70th year of the Dayo calendar. Now, it was July of the 76th year. Calculating his age. It took Ren Baqin quite some time to figure it out. After all, he had to travel back and forth, and it was a little complicated. He was already 35 years old. As for the Empress, only 6 years had passed and she was only 29 years old. As time passed, this gap would only widen. Of course, the age gap between him, his parents, and his younger brother was the same. He had a unique timeline that was different from everyone else. Whether it was the people of Earth or the people of this world. It sounded awesome, but Ren Baqin felt that it was rather bitter. He wandered between 2 worlds, but he was different from the people of each world. The reason why she felt this way was mainly because of what Ren Wanyan said, "Brother, you are 43 years old, right? Why does he look so young? You look younger than me." 18 years had passed on Earth. On the other hand, Papa Ren and Mama Ren only had one thought. "You're already 43 years old, when are you going to have a son?" Even Wan Nian's son is already 4 years old, but there's still no movement here. If there was really a problem, he could just go for artificial insemination or simply artificially cultivate the baby. This was also a new technology nowadays, directly cultivating babies outside the body. It was different from test tube babies. In test tube babies, the embryos had to be transferred to the mother's body to be incubated. However, artificially cultivated babies were born outside the body from the beginning to the end. It was highly controllable. Renbochin was also very vexed by their thoughts. For the elderly, there was nothing more important than having children. Especially in a situation where he didn't lack anything and didn't have to worry about anything, the hope of playing with his grandchildren was greatly expanded. He wanted to say that the Empress was already pregnant, but only God knew when she would give birth. She was already 31 months pregnant, which was 3 times longer than a normal woman's pregnancy, but there was still no sign of her giving birth. Your Majesty, how is our son? The first thing Renbochin did when he returned to the palace from outside the city was to touch the Empress's belly. As for listening to the baby's heartbeat, he didn't care as he couldn't hear it. There was a ball in the Empress's belly, which isolated the Empress from his or her senses. At the same time, it also isolated sounds such as the baby's heartbeat. The Empress sighed faintly. Now, she was also a little irritated. After all, it wasn't that convenient to carry such a belly. At first, she was restless and irritated, but she gradually got used to it. After discovering that there was a ball in her belly, she found it interesting for a period of time. Now, she became irritated again. She was irritated and didn't like Renbochin. With a cold face, she scolded, "It's all because of you, you dog." Even though she was scolding him, Renbochin felt his heart warm up. He laughed mischievously, hugged the Empress's waist, and gently stroked her belly with his palm. The Empress also quietened down. Both of them sat quietly for a while, and the Empress brought up the past again. "Where's my wine pool? Meat forest? Also, you don't even plant candy trees anymore." Renbochin jumped up upon hearing this. "What are you doing?" "Digging up trees." Renbochin ran to the courtyard, dug up a tree, and planted it in the shop. Then, he went back to Earth and brought back a few sacks of candy to plant another candy tree for the Empress. Seeing this tree, the Empress thought of the first candy tree that Renbochin planted for her. Immediately, all of her anxiety disappeared. It was a pity that the tree was destroyed in the original bedroom. In the 8th month of the 76th year of the Dao calendar, a few major events happened in Lan City. First, tickling was included in the public security punishment. This matter became a joke for a while. However, half a month later, no one who had experienced this punishment could laugh. This punishment was even more painful and torturous than being whipped. Furthermore, they weren't injured at all and could still jump around after being released from the Public Order Bureau. Originally, the arena had already exhausted most of the people's energy. Now, with the addition of this extremely painful punishment, the various public security incidents in the city were greatly reduced. 1 month later, even the number of people fighting in Lan City decreased. Even if there were, most of them were aboriginals from other places and a small number of Lan City citizens who were hot-blooded and didn't care about anything else. If people who came to Lan City back then were to come again, they would definitely be shocked by the change in public security. As for the second matter, it was also one of the reasons why public security improved again. Currently, there were 103 public toilets in Lan City, but only 7 people were in charge of these toilets. It could be said that no one would do this kind of work. Many notices were put up to recruit people, but the people who came often quit after working for a day. As long as they had the strength, there were plenty of places that lacked manpower. Whether it was transportation or mining, who would do this kind of work? And what the aboriginals lacked the least was strength. Helpless, Renbochin could only hand this matter over to the Public Order Bureau. In addition to being tickled, those who fought in Lawn City also had to clean the toilets for 3 days. As a result, public security in Lawn City improved and the predicament of the lack of manpower in public sanitation facilities was alleviated. However, 1 month later, Renbochin was troubled by this matter again. The third matter was also the most important. After 4 months, Dayo's first pure manual tractor was finally completed. This tractor was 4.2 meters long and 1.7 meters tall. It was wheeled, weighed 1,300 kilograms, and had 21 horsepower. It could pull 8 tons of goods, which was 8,000 kilograms. If used for farming, it had a good ability to break the soil. Plowing, harrowing, and rotary tillage were almost above average. After all, it was a tractor that had been developed by many scholars from Earth. It had a high degree of completion and directly met Renbochin's standards. It was even better than expected and could be directly finalized and put into use. After trying it out, Renbochin immediately set a good date for the debut of this world's first self-propelled tractor. This was also the first product launch event in this world. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second, booksellers mobile. Chapter 967. Originally, he owed 2 chapters. Including today's debt, he had to pay it off before the end of the month. The pretty boy of the Empress's family was stuck, requesting leave. Currently typing, please wait a moment. After the content has been updated, please refresh the page to receive the latest update. Chapter 968. August of the 76th year of Dayo. After the court session, the crowd didn't leave. Instead, they waited in front of the palace. A bunch of rare mounts were brought over by the guards. There was a white saber-toothed tiger, a 5 to 6 meter tall gorilla, a huge black feline with horns on its head, and a huge lizard that looked like a western dragon. The red-horned bull king, which was much larger than an ordinary horned bull, didn't stand out at all. It was roughly equivalent to an Audi A4 squeezed into a row of sports cars. There was also a high-spec Wuling Hongguang next to it. An earth wheel expert, He Langjun, was more than 3 meters above the ground. 2 fangs protruded from the sides of his mouth as he anxiously dug at the stone slabs on the ground with his hooves. Not long after, he dug out 2 holes. A nearby guard noted it down in a small notebook for a fine later. If the palace was destroyed in front of other places, the whole family might have to reunite. However, for Dayo, the imperial palace gate had been accidentally damaged countless times. The stone slabs in the throne room had to be changed every few days. Everyone stood outside the palace and chatted in groups of 3 to 5. From time to time, they would hear people asking what they were going to see this time. After all, the Empress had made everyone stay with great fanfare, so they couldn't help but be curious. The last time something like this happened was when they saw something called a steam train. It had to be said that the steam train was indeed magical. One only needed to fill it with some burning stones, and it could run continuously without getting tired. Moreover, it was quite strong. While everyone was chatting, the main gate of the palace opened, and the Empress's carriage slowly came out. After a short pause, she set off for the east gate. Along the way, the commoners cheered and then followed her majestically out of the city gate. By the time the Empress and her party left the city, there were already nearly 1,000 people following behind them. At this time, there was an object that was a few meters long and wrapped in red cloth on the cement road outside the east gate. Renbochin was sitting at the side and looking up at the sky. There were many students following him, and they stood up to welcome the crowd. "Zhao Prince Consort, what good thing do you have for us to see this time?" Tong Jinye stroked his beard and laughed. Everyone already knew that as long as there was something for them to see, it would definitely be made by Zhao Prince Consort. Everyone was looking forward to seeing what he made. Every time he made something, they would be amazed. You will know very soon. Renbochin smiled at the crowd, raised his head, and looked at the commoners who were following them from afar. This was a pretty good opportunity to promote their products. With today's performance, the tractor would definitely spread throughout Lon City. After a period of time, the citizens of Lon City, who had been waiting for a long time, would be able to see its true appearance. Presumably, there would be people who would be willing to try it out. The only question was whether anyone could afford it. Even though he was prepared to sell it at a loss, his purpose was to promote this new technology, increase Dayo's transportation capacity, reduce the use of manpower in many aspects, and improve the current manpower shortage. However, the promotion still needed time. Even if they were to lose money, the price was not a small problem. For now, the biggest customers were still the Ministry of Works and the Ministry of War. However, in Renbochin's opinion, the greatest value of a tractor wasn't just in transportation. In terms of transportation from Lon City to the Yun Nation, trucks were still faster and less technical than tractors. In addition to being able to be used on muddy roads in the south, tractors could also replace manpower, liberate a group of laborers from the fields, and put them into factories or other places. Renbochin wanted to reach out and support the Empress, but she disappeared from the carriage in a flash. She landed on the ground behind Renbochin and said without turning her head, "Let's go and take a look at your new product." Renbochin smiled helplessly. Even though she was 32 months pregnant, the Empress was still the Empress without any pretense. "Everyone, this is an epic-making product," Renbochin said as he walked forward. "You said the same thing last time." Qin Chuan chimed in from nearby. "Epic-making technology is produced too quickly." Renbochin laughed. "In other words, this era will change very quickly." Renbochin walked to the front of the tractor, pressed his hand on the red cloth, turned to the crowd, and said, "Everyone can see the potential of the steam train from last time. With the steam train, we can connect two distant places and transport 100,000 soldiers and matching supplies to the Yun Nation or even Great Xia within 3 days. This has completely changed the previous concept of war, where the army and horses have to be mobilized before the provisions are deployed. In the face of war, we can have faster reaction speed and better mobility. The problem is, where will the war come from, and who will it fight?" Qin Chuan spread his hands. If there was a war, only Great Xia and the Yun Nation would be left. However, at present, they couldn't even take down the Yun Nation, and Great Xia couldn't even take care of themselves. It was foreseeable that there wouldn't be a war for the next 10 to 20 years. War is just one example. The more important thing is transportation. With the Yun Nation, the price of iron in Lon City is only 1/5 of what it used to be, and the transportation of large quantities of supplies is still a problem. With the train, transportation will be easier and faster, and it will consume less manpower and material resources. In the long run, it will naturally be worth it. This is especially true for the transportation of fresh goods, which is incomparable to land transportation. If it weren't for those big iron eaters, the price of iron in Lon City would have dropped to half of what it used to be, someone whispered. Renbochin looked over and said, "You have to look at it in the long run. Iron alone isn't everything. Food, fruits, vegetables, cloth, and minerals. Do you still want to bring back the iron produced by the Yun Nation with ox carts every year?" Everyone immediately laughed. The one who interrupted just now was an official from the Ministry of Revenue who was full of resentment. In fact, it wasn't just him. The entire Ministry of Revenue was full of resentment. The steel mills and the laying of steel rails were simply like monsters that swallowed iron, like bottomless pits. At least half of the iron ore mined in the Yun Nation over the past 2 years had been used, and not a single ripple had been seen. 1 meter of steel rails weighed 100 kilograms, and the rails needed to be on both sides. 1 kilometer of steel rails weighed 100,000 kilograms. This was equivalent to the iron ore production of Dayo in an entire year. This figure made the people from the Ministry of Works and the Ministry of Revenue feel a little dizzy. The Yun nation originally produced about 22 million kilograms of iron a year and less than 1.5 million kilograms of steel. Over the past 3 years, with the large-scale use of steam engines in various mines, the iron output had increased to 40 million kilograms, and the steel output was close to 10 million kilograms. Most of the steel output had been invested in the railway. Over the past 2 years, only 100 kilometers had been laid, which was equivalent to 200 kilometers. Based on the current steel production rate, it would take at least another 10 years to finish laying this railway. However, this was only for now. Renbochin estimated that the iron output could reach 80 million kilograms and the steel output could reach 30 million kilograms within 5 years. It seemed like a lot, but after careful calculation, it was only 40,000 tons and 15,000 tons, respectively. Not to mention compared to the Republic of China, it was far inferior to even the Song dynasty. The biggest limitation wasn't just the technology. The equipment and technology used in the mines and steel mills had at least reached the level of the middle stage of the Industrial Revolution. However, the supporting technology and the number of personnel couldn't keep up. For example, equipment manufacturing, equipment maintenance, personnel training, and so on had become shackles. It would take at least 3 years for these conditions to be alleviated, and it would erupt in 5 years. However, the investment in steel alone was an astronomical figure, not to mention the investment in manpower and material resources. Even though the situation of the national treasury had improved greatly in the past 2 years, the annual investment was enough to make the people in the Ministry of Revenue feel heartache. This was the case even though they knew the significance of the railway. Therefore, no one found it strange that the people in the Ministry of Revenue were resentful. Anyone would feel heartache. Needless to say, the Ministry of Revenue had always been stingy. Chapter 969. Alright, let's not talk about the train anymore. It's a little bitter now so that we'll have better days in the future. Bitterness comes before sweetness. Today, I'm here to show you an epic-making product, a tractor. He reached out and pulled the red cloth away, revealing a red steel monster. Well, he hoped that this tractor had the appearance of a monster as it would be more shocking. However, the tractor in front of him looked no different from the brick-hauling tractors that ran all over the streets when he was young. In fact, it was even simpler. Most of the structure was covered with a cover at the front, but the 2 sides were completely open, and most of the structure inside could be seen. The driver's compartment was 2/3 of the way from the front to the back, making the tractor's head look very long. This tractor could be said to be twice the size of a tractor on Earth. On one hand, it was because the current level of forging in Dayo was relatively low, and it was difficult to make the engine too small. On the other hand, it was because of the large fuel tank. Obviously, a large fuel tank was very practical in this world. Although he felt that this tractor looked a little lame, everyone was still very interested in it. After all, such a steel creation could be seen from the side that its structure was very complex and full of the style of technological fantasy. What is this used for? A miner? Or is it made of steel? Everyone walked around in a circle and discussed. Why is this thing so weak? Lian Liang held the round handle and waved it above his head. Ren Bochen's face immediately darkened. Put it down. Before he could demonstrate the tractor, Lian Liang pulled the steering wheel off. Fortunately, the steering wheel and the axle below were separated and could be attached with a buckle. However, he didn't dare to let this group of people continue touching it. After chasing everyone aside, Ren Bochin sat on the tractor without saying anything and said to the Empress, "Your Majesty, let me take you for a ride." The Empress sneered. Did he think that she didn't know what a tractor was? However, even though she said that, she was still a little interested. After all, this wasn't Earth. This was Deo, and this tractor was labeled Made in Dyo. With a slight movement, the Empress landed behind the seat. Let's go. He looked at it for a long time before slapping his head and carrying a Z-shaped iron tube down. He inserted it into the side of the tractor and shook it a dozen times before it started to shake. This thing hurts too. Someone asked. Renbochin returned to the driver's seat and stepped on the accelerator. Toot, the tractor shuddered, and a puff of white smoke spewed out from its rear. Only then did it move forward slowly. Then, its speed became faster and faster, reaching its maximum speed, 20 kilometers per hour. Cries of alarm came from behind. All of them came from the civilians. This thing is just like that train. It can move on its own. Tong Jingye, Tu Wan, and the rest tiptoed lightly and walked at the same level as the tractor. There isn't as much smoke as that. There's not much smoke, but it's still quite choking and smelly. This one can run on the ground. Renbochin was driving the tractor with the Empress at the back. There was also a group of people on both sides walking at the same pace as they discussed. The Empress sat at the back of the tractor. She didn't feel anything else but felt that the tractor was shaking violently. It was simply incomparable to the cars she had sat in before. She looked to the side and saw that Lian Liang was staring at the tractor with a curious look on his face. However, the Empress didn't say anything. With a push of her palm, she flew up and kicked Lian Liang more than 20 meters away. Renbochin looked at the crowd around him and twitched his mouth. He turned the steering wheel and drove the tractor out of the cement road and straight to the grassland at the side. It had just rained, and the ground was soft. When the tractor ran on it, it immediately splattered muddy water in all directions as if it was raining black. The Empress was the first to react. She reached out and grabbed Tu Wan, who was beside her, to block in front of her. Tu Wan reached out and grabbed Minister of Agriculture, who was beside her, to block in front of her. The Empress found an empty space, jumped onto the tractor, and kicked Renbochin off. Then, she imitated him and stepped on the accelerator. She sped all the way and drove the tractor into the ditch. However, the Empress also successfully left Renbochin covered in muddy water. It's quite interesting, just a little slow. The Empress stood at the side of the ditch and looked at the tractor in the ditch. Renbochin twitched his mouth and turned to look at the crowd. Everyone, this is our new product, the tractor. As you can see, this new product is like a train. It doesn't require human or animal power to run and can maintain the same speed for a long time. Its maximum speed is 60 km per hour and 120 km per hour. Without sleep or rest, it can run 1,440 km a day. It will only take 3 days to travel from Lon City to Pingdu City. An ox cart can carry about 1,500 kilograms of goods on this kind of cement road, and it will take 10 days. This kind of tractor can carry 8,000 kilograms of goods, which is 5 times that of an ox cart, but it will only take 3 days. It only needs one person to use it. One person and this kind of tractor can do what 5 people and 5 four-corned cows can do. Furthermore, its speed is 3 times that of an ox cart. An ox cart can go back and forth, but a tractor can go back and forth 3 times. After hearing Renbochin's words, everyone began to look impressed. It was useless to talk about the numbers. It was easier for them to understand the tractor by telling them how much goods it could carry and how many days it could save. In addition, the use of this kind of tractor is less dependent on the terrain. Not only can it be used on cement roads, but it can also be used in fields and on muddy roads. In other words, in areas without cement roads, the use of this kind of tractor will not be affected. An ox cart can carry 1,000 kilograms of goods, while a tractor can carry 4,000 to 5,000 kilograms of goods. Its speed is also several times that of an ox cart. Upon hearing this, everyone immediately looked happy. This is good stuff. In the eyes of most people, this thing was much more valuable than a train. In addition, this kind of tractor has other uses, such as plowing the land. A four-corned cow can plow 6 acres of land a day, and this kind of tractor with its supporting equipment can plow 60 acres a day. That's 10 times that of a four-corned cow. Guihong was delighted at first, but then thought about it and said, "This thing is pretty good, but if this thing does all the farm work, what can people do?" Factories. Our factories need a lot of manpower. Ren Boqian said without hesitation. Forget it, let's not think about that. This thing must be very valuable, right? In fact, only the various ministries can afford this thing. Also, it depends on whether the minister in charge of transportation agrees or not. Tong Jingye pointed out the problem, 200 taels. Ren Boqian said a figure that was equivalent to 10 years of annual income for an ordinary person. However, the load and speed of a tractor were several times that of an ox cart. Within a month, a tractor could make 5 round trips to the Yun Nation and transport a total of 40,000 kilograms of goods. If the goods for the return trip were included, it would be 80,000 kilograms. An ox cart could only make 1.5 trips and could only carry a maximum of 1,500 kilograms of goods. In fact, the difference could be more than 10 times in a month. In other words, the money could be earned back in a year at most. The same was true for plowing the land. On plowing the land, a tractor could carry 10 people. Based on this calculation, the money wasn't considered expensive. How much? Guihong picked his ear and asked. The others also looked incredulous. This thing was actually only 200 taels. The iron used on this thing would probably cost more than 1,000 taels of silver, right? Baidu search 081 Chinese network yen. No advertising message. Chapter 970. 200 taels of silver. Not to mention everyone, even the Empress felt that it was incredible. The tractor weighed 1,300 kilograms, and the metal products alone weighed more than 1,100 kilograms. Not to mention the accompanying rotary tiller. In Dayo, a steel knife that weighed 10 kilograms cost about 15 taels of silver. The value of the iron was equivalent to 10 taels of silver, which could be said to be equivalent to 2 kilograms of steel. 1,100 kilograms of steel and the rotary tiller were worth at least 600 taels of silver. Not to mention the expensive rubber, the manpower and material resources consumed by the tractor, and the technical content involved. The merchants of the Yun Nation wouldn't even blink if such a rare thing were to be sold for 2,000 to 3,000 taels of silver. Although these people didn't understand the cost of research and development, they still knew that rare things were precious. However, Ren Boqian actually said 200 taels of silver, and everyone almost thought that he was talking about gold. Ren Boqian spread his hands and said, "There's no other way. You guys can't afford it anyway. Give me 100 of these things first." Tong Jingye rolled his eyes. If they dismantled this thing and sold the iron, they could earn a few hundred taels of silver per tractor. Ren Boqian rolled his eyes. This old fellow was so cunning that he didn't look like an aboriginal at all. Dream on. Don't even think about it. Even with his eyes closed, he knew what the old fellow was thinking. In fact, the cost wasn't as high as they thought. The first batch of tractors was mainly used for transportation to and from the Yun Nation. With the improvement of transportation capacity and reduction of wear and tear, the price of iron ore could be further reduced. It was expected that the price would drop by half in a short period of time. Such a tractor, together with manpower and material resources, would probably cost more than 200 taels of silver. 10,000 tractors would cost more than 2 million taels of silver. How long would it take to produce 10,000 tractors? It would be good if they could produce 60 to 70 tractors in a month. With the familiarization of the craftsmen and the application of various assembly lines, the first year's output was expected to be up to 2,000 tractors. Renbochen's requirement was to double the output in the second year and again in the third year. It would take 3 years to produce 14,000 tractors. How much change could 14,000 tractors bring to Deo? At least 140,000 people could be liberated. How much benefit could these 140,000 people bring to Renbochen? The simplest way was to put 140,000 laborers into the factory, which could produce a large number of products from the production line. This included tractor production, which could be increased again. If these products were sent to the Yun nation through the greatly improved transportation capacity, they would be able to make a huge profit. As for the common people, they could also increase their income through additional factory labor and long-distance transportation, increasing their spending power. Weren't all the fresh goods in Dayo's market the products of the Imperial Trading Company? Like spices. Like glass products. For example, a series of products that were about to be launched into the market to improve people's livelihood. The tractor was losing money, but everything else was making high profits. In this way, a large portion of it would flow back into his pocket. In the long run, the lives of some of the commoners would improve. Through the factories, they would be able to train a large number of skilled workers. They would also be able to earn back what they had lost through other means, and Dayo would become more prosperous. Everyone had profited. Of course, these words were not meant to be said to these people. It's fine if I get 2 for myself, but don't even think about getting more. This is to support a portion of the people, not to let you take advantage of loopholes. Renbochen smiled at everyone. Her Majesty is willing to use this money to let the people of Dayo live a better life. However, if you have any ill intentions, you will be robbing the money that Her Majesty is using to support the people. As for the consequences, there was no need to say the consequences. Everyone immediately understood what Renbochen meant. Her Majesty took out money from the imperial treasury to subsidize the commoners, which was a good deed. However, if they dared to stretch out their hands, Her Majesty could chop off their claws. Feng Ho, Gui Hong, and the others lifted the tractor out of the ditch. Renbochen inspected it and found that the quality was indeed in line with his requirements. It was sturdy, durable, and durable. When it fell into the ditch, only the outer shell was slightly damaged, and it could still be driven. While Tong Jinya and Qin Chuan were fighting over who should drive this steel monster, the Minister of Justice, Zhui Yan, had already driven the tractor away. Even though he was driving it crookedly, he quickly understood how to use this thing on this muddy grassland. He easily drove it all the way back to the east gate of Lan City and crashed into the wall. When Renbochen and the others returned, they found that the tractor was half scrapped. I stepped on the brake that you mentioned, but it didn't have any effect. Then, I pulled the reins, and this thing fell off. Zhui Yan threw the steering wheel to Renbochen with a rather helpless expression. Renbochen didn't need to think to know that this guy must have stepped on the accelerator instead of the brake. However, the fact that people in this era liked to pull the reins was still a bit of a headache. Should he add a handbrake to the tractor? He originally wanted to introduce the product in front of the commoners, but the Empress snatched it away and drove it into the ditch, causing a delay. Then, Zhui Yan crashed it into the city wall and it was scrapped. The steel monster naturally didn't cause the sensation that he had expected, but it still became a topic of conversation among the commoners in Lan City. After all, a steel monster that could only run on its own was still quite a legend. It was like a wooden ox to ordinary people in ancient times. The people in the imperial court were full of interest in this new product. According to Renbochen, it would only take 6 days to travel from Lan City to the Yun nation, which would make it much more convenient to rob them in the future. Renbochin finally didn't have to be so busy in the coming days. The tractor's production line was designed and built by those scholars, and some physics and chemistry scholars had also begun to touch upon the rules of this world through some of the equipment that he brought back. The students who had just entered the secondary schools took turns to teach the younger students, which also allowed Renbochin to spend a lot of energy at the school. The Department of Commerce was also very successful. A large number of new products were about to be launched, including a product that Renbochin was very interested in, sugar. This product, which was extremely cheap in modern times, was even more profitable than salt in this world. What excited Renbochin the most was the situation of the sword masters. In 1 year and 2 months, these people, who could at most be considered knowledgeable in this world, had reached the level of university graduates. The amount of knowledge they absorbed was like a sponge absorbing water endlessly. This kind of learning ability was terrifying, and Renbochin was extremely excited. Most of these sword masters were sent to the laboratory to help the scholars. It was estimated that in less than 2 years, there would be a group of local scholars in Dayo. There were also a few people who were sent back to the school to be teachers. The first batch of highly educated teachers had finally appeared. It was expected that next year's enrollment would increase several times. After finishing all of this, Renbochin was finally ready to visit Xianjia and Linchaola. However, due to an accident, he couldn't make the trip. This was because the first batch of adult magazines from Japan had finally appeared on the shelves of the bookstores in Lon City, causing a huge sensation in just 3 days. Then, Renbochin's leg was broken. First, set a small goal, such as, remember in 1 second, Shukju Mobile Edition. You're tuning in to the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.